All right, is everybody ready? Great. I'll bring the January 16th meeting of the El Paso County Planning Commission to order. My name is Jay Carlson. I'm the vice chairman. I'm standing in for Mr. Bailey today, who's out of town. So wish everybody a happy new year. Haven't seen anybody since before the holidays, so good to be back. See everybody. We've got a full house here today as far as the folks on the dais. So I will notate the voting members today. Ms. Jack, Mr. Byers, Ms. Fuller, Mr. Moraes, Mr. Schulteis, Mr. Trowbridge, Mr. Whitney, Mr. Markowitz, and myself. Mr. Smith, you said you would be glad to leave if we didn't need everybody, so thank you for coming in this morning.
Here's your hat.
Staff, do we have any announcements?
Good morning, Commissioners. For the record, Megan Harrington, Planning Director. Good morning. Yes, just a couple things for you this morning. A majority of you have already met Jessica Merriam. Jessica is our new board support specialist, so she will be running these meetings from a staff perspective as soon as she gets up and running. So please welcome Jessica. And with the change in the Board of County Commissioners and their new appointments to support boards, your new county commissioner liaison is Commissioner Carrie Geithner. And so with Commissioner Vanderwerf leaving, Commissioner Geithner is now the Planning Commission liaison, and Commissioner Williams is the Board of Adjustments liaison. And so I just wanted to make sure that you knew that. Justin, do you have anything else for the group? Thank you.
No, ma'am, I do not. No, sir.
Nothing, thank you.
Have a good day.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
Megan, we discussed at some point having a group meeting with the El Paso County Commissioners and us to just kind of make sure we're all on the same page. Is that something that we're still pursuing?
When we met last with the Board of County Commissioners and the chair and the vice chair at the time met with the liaison, so Commissioner Vanderwerf, I believe Commissioner Vanderwerf's direction was that as the liaison, it was best to kind of coordinate with him first. And so at this point, no, there has been no movement on a joint meeting. But if there are any issues, concerns, or topics, we can always set up another meeting with the chair and the vice chair and the board liaison.
What would you like to see it happen with all of us, or? We did meet with, Tom and I met with Mr. Vanderwerf, privately. It was a good meeting, but.
When I was on the City Planning Commission, we did have a joint work session with City Council to talk about things. I don't know if there's any particular items that are of that importance to put on an agenda, but I know I found that meeting very helpful in terms of what they expect from us. And
Yeah, I'd agree. When we met, we just went, he kind of voiced what they were looking for, and I think we brought some of that back. The biggest thing, I think, was they wanted to hear, opposition to any voting that was going on and the reasons for that, so that they could see that in their records. But we tried numerous times, and it's never really happened to get the whole group of commissioners together, so we can give that a try, I guess. But let's start with just getting Tom and I to meet with them, especially since there's some new ones.
Yes, so I will reach out to the Board of County Commissioners. I will not make a promise to you how long that will take, because with two new commissioners, their agendas
Sure.
are pretty full. And so our process internally is for me to go to an informal meeting and ask them of your request and determine how they can best do that and the timing. And I will do that at my next opportunity, and then bring that back here to you. And if not in this forum, I will email the chair and the vice chair, and we'll get that moving.
Thank you very much. Now's the time that we would allow the public to address us with anything that is not on our docket today. Is there anyone here that would like to bring anything up? Anyone online that we know of? All right, thank you. Do we need to read the Sunshine Law? It's on my list of items to do today. I don't see it anywhere to read. Yeah, I'd only memorized the first part.
Have you been provided with a statement to read? Okay.
Can we do it next time, or do we have to do it today?
Is there a resolution in the packet that all of the board members would have seen?
No.
Okay. I think it would be important to share that with the board members because we do need to adopt that resolution through a vote, so. So it's up to you. You can continue it to next time. You can pass it around and we can take care of it later in the agenda, however you'd like to proceed. But we would need a motion and a vote.
All right. Well, can we get a copy of it, and Mr. Trowbridge will read it for us? Pardon me? I'll get copies. All right. You could just get a copy. Just for him is fine, just one. Yeah. All right, we will put off the sunshine law issue till later in the day. All right. Our first item is approval of minutes. Anyone have any changes to the minutes from last time? Seeing none, we'll deem those approved. First agenda item is agenda item 3C, file number VR 2321, vacation and replat Owl Marketplace, filing number 1. Does anybody like to pull that as a regular item? Any questions or comments? I would entertain a motion.
Mr. Chair,
It's Ms. Schultes.
with regards to agenda item 3C, file number VR 2321 for the vacation and replat of Owl Marketplace, filing number 1, I move for approval in accordance with the attached resolution with 10 conditions and 3 notations, and with the finding of sufficiency or insufficiency of water quality, quantity, and dependability, that this item be forwarded to the Board of County Commissioners for their consideration.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Jennings.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I may have misheard, but I believe that he stated a finding of sufficiency or insufficiency. So if we could pick one, that'd be great.
Finding of sufficiency. I was just reading off the thing, so finding of sufficiency.
All right.
I'd still second.
All right. Thank you.
Rusty from it.
All right. I'll take the vote. Mr. Markowitz,
Aye.
Mr. Schultes,
Aye.
Trowbridge,
Aye.
Ms. Fuller,
Aye.
Ms. Jacks,
Aye.
Mr. Whitney,
Aye.
Mr. Byers,
Aye.
Mr. Moraes.
Aye.
The chair votes aye, so that passes unanimously. Next item is agenda item 3D, file number MS-244, minor subdivision, Volmer Road, Stimple Family Minor Subdivision. Would anyone like to see this pulled out in the regular items? All righty. I would entertain a motion.
Mr. Chair,
Mrs. Fuller.
with regards to agenda item 3D, file MS-244 minor subdivision for Volma Road Stimple Family Minor Subdivision, I move for approval with 5 conditions and 4 notations and a recommendation of finding for sufficiency with regard to water quality, quantity, and dependability, and that this item be forwarded to the Board of County Commissioners for their consideration.
Do you have a second?
Second.
Thank you. All right, we'll take the vote. Mr. Moraes,
Aye.
Mr. Byers,
Aye.
Whitney,
Aye.
Ms. Jacks,
Aye.
Ms. Fuller,
Aye.
Mr. Trowbridge.
Aye.
Mr. Schultes,
Aye.
Mr. Markowitz.
Aye.
Chair votes aye, so that passes unanimously. All right, on to agenda item 3E, file number P2415, map amendment, excuse me, rezoning Sterling Ranch East, filing number 7, RS 5000. Would anybody like to pull that and make that a regular item? No? All right. Entertain a motion on that one. Okay. Ms. Jack.
Okay. Mr. Chair, with regards to agenda item agenda item 3E, file number P2415, for a map amendment rezoning Sterling Ranch East, filing number 7, RS 5000, with two conditions and two notations, and applicable, a finding of sufficiency for water quality and dependability. I move that this item be forwarded to the Board of County Commissioners for their consideration.
Thank you. Anyone second?
Second.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
if I may note, this is a rezone, so there is no finding for water sufficiency required, and this office did not do a review.
All right.
Wouldn't have done it on a rezone.
It says it'll be required later. I didn't read. Oh. Oh, well, we'll get it right later. Anyway, without the finding of sufficiency for water.
Bill second.
Who was that? The Schultes?
Yes.
All righty. I'll take the vote. Mr. Markwich?
Aye.
Mr. Schultes?
Aye.
Mr. Trowbridge?
Aye.
Ms. Fuller?
Aye.
Ms. Jacks?
Aye.
Mr. Whitney?
Aye.
Mr. Byers?
Aye.
Mr. Moraes?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Item passes unanimously. We're making some time here. All right. Moving on to the regular items.
Mr. Chair?
Oh, ready for sunshine? All right, we're ready for sunshine.
statement. I have a question for Ms. Seago. Do I need to read the entire resolution? Or do I just need the subparagraphs? Or do you know? I'm happy to read it all.
Right. If no other commission members have seen it, then I would recommend that it be read so we know what we're voting on.
Happy to do it. All right. Good luck. Mr. Chair.
You ready to do that?
Yep.
All right, Mr. Trowbridge, there's sunshine law statement for the year.
All right. Resolution number 2025-01, 2025 Sunshine Resolution. Whereas the El Paso County Planning Commission is a local public body subject to certain requirements of Colorado Revised Statutes 24-6-402 relating to public meetings, and whereas the commission is required by said statute to designate each year a place or places within the boundaries of the local public body for posting of public notices of its meetings, and whereas the commission's bylaws revised August 23, 2022 require that the commission shall designate by resolution the posting locations of public meetings requiring public notice, and the official custodian of the minutes of the public meetings at the first regular meeting of each calendar year. And whereas House Bill 19-1087 went into effect on August 2nd, 2019, and allows local governments to satisfy meeting notice requirements by posting on the local government's website. Now therefore be it resolved by the El Paso County Planning Commission, 1, the official place for posting public notices of the locations of El Paso County Planning Commission meetings and other public notices for the year 2025 shall be on the El Paso County Planning and Community Development Department's webpage, https://planningdevelopmentelpaso.com/2025 hearing schedule, and when possible also at agendasuite.org, IIP El Paso. If a particular public notice cannot be posted to the county's website, it shall be posted in the lobby and/or on the outside notice board of Centennial Hall, 200 South Cascade Avenue, Colorado Springs, Colorado. 2, public notices may also be posted in other locations as determined appropriate by the Planning Commission or the clerk to the commission. The clerk shall be the official custodian of the records of the Planning Commission's public meetings. The office of the clerk is located at the Pikes Peak Regional Building Center, 2880 International Circle, Suite 110, Colorado Springs, Colorado. And that's the
Great, thank you. So we need a motion and acceptance. All right, would somebody like to make a motion to accept the sunshine law?
I'll move to adopt, Mr. Chair.
All right. Mr. Whitney,
I'll second.
why don't you state it officially?
I'm sorry, you're looking to me to do something?
Yeah, why don't you state officially that you're moving that we accept the Sunshine Law?
I move to adopt the Sunshine Law and accept it on behalf of the
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Second.
Who was that?
Eric.
All right, Mr. Moraes. All right, I'll take the vote. Mr. Moraes?
Aye.
Mr. Byers?
Aye.
Mr. Whitney?
Aye.
Ms. Jack?
Aye.
Ms. Fuller?
Aye.
Mr. Trowbridge?
Aye.
Ms. Shipples?
Aye.
Mr. Markovich?
Aye.
Chair votes aye, so we accept our Sunshine Law. All right, moving into a regular item for the day. Agenda item number 5A, file number VA247, variance of use, Watts variance of use.
Good morning, Commissioners. Carrie Parsons with Planning and Community Development, and I hope you all had a good holiday. The review team on this was myself and Mr. Sandstrom with the Public Works Department. If there's anybody watching and would you like to participate remotely, if you could please email our board specialist at pcdhearings@elpasoco.com and we'll get you in the queue. This is a specific request for a variance of use to allow a commercial vehicle repair garage in the R4 Planned Development Zoning District. It should be noted that the vehicle repair garage for a commercial vehicle repair garage is defined by our Land Development Code as an establishment used for the care and repair of passenger vehicles or light trucks, major minor work such as paint, body, and fender work, or engine and transmission, overhaul and incidental storage, parking, and repair vehicles, but excluding dismantled of wrecked vehicles or storage of junked vehicles. It also should be noted that this request also includes larger vehicles such as types of vehicles used, ambulatory vehicles, SWAT vehicles, emergency response team vehicles, RV-type response vehicles. The applicant has stated in their letter of intent that all the vehicles that they work on are government contract vehicles. More specifically, the purpose of a variance of use, in a nutshell, is utilized when a specific use is not allowed in that zone district. So if it's not an outright allowed use, it's not a temporary use, it's not a special use, the only way an applicant can move forward is to request a variance of use, which needs to be approved by the Board of County Commissioners, and then, of course, a recommendation by this body, the Planning Commission. It also should be noted that a variance of use needs to be analyzed and reviewed specifically to this property. So a variance of use that may have been approved on a different property is not necessarily relative and may not be considered under this particular use based on the Land Development Code. The criteria of approval for a variance of use is listed on your screen. I won't read them. I'll just pause until you have a chance to view them. Okay, I was like,
I didn't know you were waiting on me. Thanks.
all right. There is some opposition to this. You do have attached to your staff report a couple letters from the Meadow Lake Airport Association. Additionally, there have been some adjacent property owners or community members within the airport that have provided some letters, which should have been uploaded into passageways and are also publicly viewable on the website under additional documents in the file. Safety, compatibility, lack of hangars in the airport, taxiway blockage or interference, the size of the proposed business, And then MLA specifically discussed the longevity of the business and airport traffic concerns and again, scale of the business. As you can see, this property is within the R4 plan development. It's also within the General Aviation Overlay District, or the GAO for Meadow Lake Airport, which was adopted in 1970. In a nutshell, the General Aviation Overlay Zoning District basically allows that the airport can have commercial uses that support the mission of the airport. And so I won't read this verbatim. I'll let you guys peruse over it.
May I ask, does that apply to all the area of the airport or just the landing strips and airport building, et cetera?
I'm going to look for a head nod. I believe it's over the entire airport, but I just want to make sure that it includes the land not developed yet in the airport. I'm going to look at Dave with the airport to get a head nod or not. So in terms of the GA overlay, the overlay is over the entire airport property. Within the airport, there are sections of R4 and PUD, and I'll just back up, and that's what Dave is referring to. The R4 is the lighter pink, and the PUD is the darker, heavy rose pink. But the overlay is over the entire property of the airport.
Thank you.
I think that answers that question. Historical highlights. All of this was in your staff presentation packet. 1975, the R4 zoning boundary was created. Sorry, my throat is a little fishy today. In 1981, the current zoning district for the property of the requested variance was approved. In 1985, the board approved a plat note waiver for this particular property, but it was specifically to allow and conduct activities pertinent to the operations associated with an ultralight aircraft company. So that, again, is in support of aviation uses that you would typically see in an airport, being an ultralight aircraft. In 2001, on this property, we understand that a company known as, thank you. Thank you. In 2001, EW Defense Systems purchased the property to support a former Lockheed Martin hardware software suite that trained military pilots on how to avoid being hit by surface-to-air missiles. And it was determined that that is a supporting airport relative use, so it was an allowed use in the R4 zoning district. Staff is not sure what happened at the time of that defense contract leaving the building and when the applicant purchased the property in 2021, so I don't want to speculate. Perhaps the airport may have additional information, but staff does not know. The applicant is not in code enforcement action at this time. He has moved forward at his own request, although on Monday we did receive a complaint on this property, but no action has been taken by code enforcement. That being said, the applicant has submitted a variance for a maximum of 60 customer vehicles that would be repaired, again, government contract vehicles, which is on the 2.5 acre site with the existing buildings. And then there is also a designated off-site adjacent property site for a leased area that his employees are able to park in, and that is on page 2 of the variance of use site map. Also should be noted that there was a contract approved by the Board of County Commissioners for this particular business to work on our sheriff's vehicles. The contract specifies that the place of business must be in compliance with the Land Development Code. It is not specific to an address, so meaning it could be here if the variance is approved, or it could be somewhere else. And if there are questions on that, I would like to defer to Ms. Segal for any clarification as to how that may or may not impact this application.
Questions? Thank you.
Okay. So this is the site plan, and the north is facing this way on your screen. And so you can see the hatched area to the south is the area proposed for the vehicle storage that for customers. And then the area to the east on the adjacent property, this is the parking area that is being leased, a taxiway easement here in between, and then there is a taxiway on this portion. If you can see, I tried to make this somewhat wide to kind of show you how wide this easement is on the very west of the property. Oh, and I love it when my stuff gets upside down. I apologize. So this parking lot plan matches the same direction as page 1 of the site plan, again, showing the customer parking here. Sorry that it's upside down. Maybe we can get the applicant to fix that before board. And then again, the parking over here with the ingress egress for the taxiways here and the internal bays within the office. And then here, within the existing building, here you have a little outside storage area, and then another building here with some parking here.
Well, you've got that up there. Can you go back to that for a second? On the Fleet building, on the left-hand side there, is there any way to access that other than the taxiway? Is there another roadway north of the taxiway, or?
I'm going to let the applicant go over how the property is accessing each of the buildings, because I have not seen the operation of the business during working hours.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
one last question I had.
Mr. Morris.
What is it? What are the little tiny words in red that are leading to the Fleet building and leading next to Bay 7, 4, and 7? Do you know?
Employee parking?
That's more employee parking?
Yeah,
Okay.
sorry. Okay, master plan, it does identify the entire Meadow Lake Airport as an employment center, so the variance of use would be consistent with an employment center. And a little analysis, the 1981 R4 identifies that the land uses within the airport in the R4 zoning district may support commercial uses. So originally it deferred to PBP, Planned Business Park type uses, as long as they supported the airport mission. A nomenclature changed, and now that zone district is known as community commercial. So types of uses that we see in community commercial, gas stations, convenience stores, clubs, library, liquor store, retail shops, restaurant repair shops. It should be noted that when we look at these types of commercial uses, again, the overarching theme here in that R4 development guideline was that these types of commercial uses would support the airport. So very much when you go to Colorado Springs, you have a little retail store, a couple cafes, a bar, a gift shop. So those types of uses. Okay, also should be noted that the code is silent at this time about defining aircraft repair. So although that is supportive of an airport type use, we specifically don't have a use table that includes that language at this time.
Excuse me,
Yes.
Ms. Parsons. We had another item at this airport that was similar in that it was a grandfather property that was doing repairs, and I think it was a variance, and we ended up allowing the variance based on the fact that it was only like government contracted vehicles, and it wasn't like a Jiffy Lube where just random people are going to just be driving on and off. Does that have precedence for this variance? Because they do sound extremely similar. Because we approved that one before.
So as I mentioned earlier, that is true that a variance for a very similar use was approved, but as the Land Development Code states, under applicability of the variance of use section, each case should be evaluated on its own merit. So no, just because another land use was approved doesn't necessarily set a precedent, if that's what you're asking. You need to evaluate this based on this particular proposal and the impacts that this may or may not have. So,
Okay, thank you.
okay. We talked about that already. So, I do want to mention that the conditions of approval specifically tie this variance to the site plan and the parking plan as presented. Your Planning Commission resolution does show the legal description as well as both of those. So it's very specific if this commission does recommend approval. That is it. That is the limitations. It does not limit the sale of this business to a new owner. It specifically ties the use and the layout to that is in your resolution, the site plan and the parking plan. It should also be noted that if the gentleman adjacent that is currently leasing the western portion of his property, it doesn't preclude that gentleman from continuing on with airport related uses. It doesn't preclude that gentleman from submitting a variance to do something else on his property. I want to make sure that we understand that. Also, if this variance were to be denied, it doesn't impact that gentleman's business or property and use of hangars. It would just impact that western parking area because it's specifically employee parking for the requested use for this variance. So that's why staff attached that site plan and parking plan to the Planning Commission resolution. So it was very specific.
Ms. Fuller?
So there's about the leased parking spaces. Do we have a copy of that lease? So it's like, what if the guy decides he's not going to have allow that to continue? Then this property wouldn't have enough parking for its variance. Can you just tell us about that?
That's a great point. And there is a letter signed by the adjacent property owner agreeing to the lease. It's a very informal lease, but it is still a lease. It is a written agreement. If the applicant were to not have employee parking, they would need to come back and revise their variance of use because they can't park they can't just go park somewhere else. It's outside of the variance of use as depicted in the parking lot layout and their variance of use site map. So they wouldn't be in compliance.
So from a practical standpoint, what would that look like? So neighbor decides one day, I don't want to lease this anymore, or I want some outrageous amount, the lease falls apart. Do the neighbors have to deal with inadequate parking? Or like what would trigger and protect those neighbors?
Sure, great question. So the protection is that we have included in your resolution for approval, this is where they have to park. If that goes away, they're going to have to come back to us and show us where they're parking and amend their variance of use through the Planning Commission and Board of County Commissioner process.
Okay, I think I'd like to know more about that lease because it's a pretty big deal. And, if it's a 6-month lease, then, are we approving a variance that could possibly be only good for, are we considering a variance that could possibly be only good for 6 months?
Let me look at Nina. If Nina doesn't, or Ms. Ruiz, if she doesn't have the lease, I will make copies of it and get it to all of you. Okay.
Thank you.
And then I've got a question, and maybe it's a legal one. Are we approving this variance on that adjacent property as well?
You are approving the variance for the employee parking on that property, and that is why it's included in your resolution.
And that doesn't need to be because it's a separate property, it doesn't need to be separate? Okay.
No, because it's one and the same. If that employee parking isn't a part of this, then their operation, there's nowhere for their employees to park, so they may have to bus them in from somewhere else.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's see here. I'd like to ask Mr. Sandstrom to come and talk about traffic and drainage for the property.
Hello, good morning. Joseph Sandstrom, Department of Public Works. I was the review engineer on this project. For the traffic, no traffic impact study was required for this development because it won't exceed more than 100 daily trips or 10 trips per hour. No offsite improvements were required as a part of this, and this property is subject to El Paso County road impact fees. Are there any questions about the traffic? Okay, move on here to drainage. Sorry, I lost the mouse. Arrow, maybe? Enter. No. Sorry about that. Thank you. All right, so for the drainage, this site is in the Solberg Ranch Drainage Basin, and the drainage basin and bridge fees aren't assessed with variance of use applications. And the no drainage report is required at this time because the applicant had stated in the letter of intent that they're not proposing any alterations, additions, or additional disturbances. Are there any questions regarding the drainage? All right, I'll pass it back to Ms. Parsons and not mess this up.
Well, actually, I was going to ask if we could have the applicant come up and make their presentation. Yes, okay.
Please.
Nina Reese with Vertex Consulting. We will answer your questions kind of as we go through the presentation, but if anything new comes up, definitely feel free to let me know and I'll be happy to answer. So as Carrie indicated, we're requesting a variance of use to allow for vehicle repair garage in the R4 zone district. Actually, I'm going to go back one because this is a good slide to answer that question about access that you had, Mr. Marias. So the only way that vehicles could enter this additional structure would be through the taxiway. You could most certainly walk there. So employees walk across, they do not drive across from one building to the other.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
could we ask Ms. Marie's a quick question? Just for clarification purposes, we're asking for a variance of use, but I take it is in use in this capacity at the moment and has been since 2021?
That is correct.
Okay.
Without any code violation to date.
And code violations are triggered by complaints, so correct?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. Okay, Carrie already covered the site location. So with that, as Carrie indicated, this is not a Jiffy Lube. It is not a traditional vehicle repair garage that you would think of. So we thought it might be helpful to bring the property owners forward, have them tell you a little bit about what their business is, what they do, so that you have that understanding before we get into the criteria. So John Watts is going to come forward.
Hi, good morning. Thank you guys for allowing us to be here today. And yeah, we just kind of wanted to give a brief overview of who we are, what we do, kind of our history to help kind of paint the picture. I was a detective and a deputy with El Paso County for about 12 years, and I left as a detective working homicide. And my wife, Caitlin Watts, she was former the Girl of the West for the Pikes Peak Bus Rodeo, working at Officescapes and was a project manager. And how we ran into this, I have no clue. Not sure if it's good or bad yet. I guess that's why we're here. So we took the entrepreneurial route. I left in 2018 and started an upfitting company where we build emergency vehicles. The idea actually came from a fleet manager over at the sheriff's office because vehicles were getting driven to Denver and there was an upfitter up there and it was taking people out of office and it was taking a long time. So we decided to do it, and what we weren't ready for is that it was in high demand. And we learned a lot, in which led us to the position we are in today. Over the course of the years, we immediately started working with GSA. Right out of the gate, they kind of phone called us and said, "Hey, John, you have previous law enforcement experience. We're in support of you. We'd like you to build our cars, help us, and do that." So we serve the entire military installations here, Air Force Academy, Fort Carson, up to Schriever and up to Buckley Air Force Base. And so we were the service center basically to outfit and help all the emergency vehicles that service everything you can imagine that happens on Air Force and installations. So that led into obviously more contracts being in place to include, yes, the El Paso County Sheriff's Office, City of Colorado Springs. We currently build every police car you see on the road today here locally. And so it's been a very big blessing to us. And I think it's important to go back and answer the void that I think Carrie had, which was the previous use of this building. As you guys we purchased it in 2021, but we started leasing it from the previous owners that did do the electronic warfare from Jim and Jamie Johnston in 2018. They leased us the building. They actually built, I don't know if I'm allowed to go in a lot of depth on that. I guess there's a lot of secret stuff, but vehicles inside the bays that were used for stuff that I don't know and well above me. So that's kind of where it led to. And then we leased the property and purchased it from them in 2021. At the time of purchase, no covenances, no requirements. It was, hey, welcome. And we were welcomed with open arms, not only from the previous owners, but quite honestly, the Meadow Lake Airport Association, as they love having police cars and fire trucks and all of that on site. It really helped. It has grown over time. There's no question. We have a lot of customers, but we serve an important purpose. And I think in terms of specifically identifying airport use, we do serve and still continue to serve Air Force Academy, Fort Carson, all your local military installations in terms of service in their vehicles for emergency lighting. So with that, can I answer questions?
Mr. Whitney?
Just real quickly, sir, so you leased it in 2018, bought it in 2021?
Yes, sir.
And did you do the upfitting between 2018 and 2021, or were you doing what had been done before?
No, sir. Upfitting.
Okay. So you've been doing this work in that building since 2018?
7 years, yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
And I think it would go, sorry.
The variance is for any automotive stuff, and as people have said, it could be a Jiffy Lube at some point, and not a branded name, but right, it looks to me like all you're doing is government and military vehicles. Is there a reason to not limit it to that?
I think,
We are.
yeah, we are.
So we actually are limited.
Oh, is it?
Yes, I think that was, Carrie referred to it, but it's included on our site plan. We have added a limitation that it's only for governmental vehicles. So
I thought that was just in reference to RVs and large trucks and whatnot.
my understanding, and we can hear from her, but my understanding is that that note, and then also what she's included in her resolution, would limit it to only governmental businesses and not anybody else.
Carrie Parsons, yes, sir, the site plan limits this repair to only government contract vehicles. They cannot service private folks.
Okay, great, thanks.
And I think it's very important to note that we do not do any mechanical work at all. Motors, tires, oil changes, all of that kind of stuff, we do not do at all. We only get the cars and put emergency equipment and decals on those cars. They're brand new, and they typically we don't really ever have used, broke down cars unless the government likes to crash them, as we all know. So they're very good at that. Any other questions I can help answer or facilitate?
Thanks.
Oh, did you want to talk about the lease real quick?
Oh,
Yeah,
I can explain the lease. So the current owner across from us, Ryan, him and I it is a very informal lease. Him and I have come up with an agreement that, hey, I can park my cars there. He's in support of us. He is not here today, but as long as we need it, until he decides to develop, and you're correct. If that changes, then I will have to reduce the amount of cars that come on site, which we really try to do in terms of cars on site and vehicles coming in. It's usually, we house a lot of cars, they stay there, but it's typically 1 for 1 or something like that because the agency is picking up the vehicle, dropping off, or something like that. So if that were to come or arise at this time, he is not there because I've had these discussions with him. Right now, it's indefinite until something changes.
Here.
Yes, Mr. Whitney.
Sorry, I may be unclear on something now. So I thought the lease portion of the parking was for employee parking.
It is. So if Ryan decides to develop his property at this time in that specific area, he's
Right.
not. I would have to reduce the number of vehicles that I keep on site on that map. I would have to reduce that to cover my employees' parking.
Okay, I was just, when you were saying 1 for 1, so you're not going to have a volume increase, I wasn't sure how that applies to the employees.
Yeah, typically, and he's given me authorization to use kind of that property how we need it. Like, hey, if I have extra cars come in or they sit or big trucks, he's like, yeah, use it however you want to. Because again, he doesn't need it. We do pay him on a monthly basis. It's very informal. It's, it's one of those things, we're friends and.
Well, as a recovering lawyer, the only thing I might suggest to you in the back of your mind is you get something formal, because to Ms. Fuller's point, if I understand the way this resolution is put together, that lease goes away, you go away.
Yeah.
Or at least you're out of compliance at that point.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Yike. That's a pretty big linchpin and a big ask.
Yeah, I would have to absolutely limit the amount of cars that come in to follow back into compliance. So I'd have to adjust the amount of available spots on my end, which I can do. It just takes some finagling on my end.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Ms. Fuller.
Don't go so fast. So it's 50 employee parking spots that are being leased. How many parking spots are on site?
So one thing that I also wanted, I'll turn it back over to John, but one thing that I also wanted to point out is he has quite a bit of space between that one-story metal building, the 8244, and his main building that is not being utilized. Mr. Marias, you had asked the question about those parking spaces. You had said, what is that red? Those are parking spaces. He's just not utilizing them that way today. The county land development code requires a certain number of parking spaces, which ends up being 55 just based upon the use. But he only has a maximum of 24 employees who are not all on shift at the same time. So he does not even utilize all of those parking spaces today.
That didn't answer. How many parking spots are on the site right now?
There
His site.
are, I think there's 11 that are, let me count. Yeah, so there's 11 that are on site depicted on this site plan, but there are additional parking spaces that are between 8244 and the main building that are not depicted because they're not being utilized that way.
On the south side of the metal building there?
Correct.
Yeah.
So did I hear you say that he's supposed to have 55 parking spots and currently there's only a dozen?
No, there's not. There's 55 parking spaces.
On his particular, not leased.
The lease area counts towards his parking. So
If I didn't count the lease part, so if without the neighbor, I just want to understand. I think the informal lease is like just a crazy risk, but you know, I finance small businesses all the time, so I get it. Like entrepreneurs are risk takers, so it's and I'm uptight, so I get it.
there is a signed lease and it has been uploaded into EDARP. So there is a written agreement that is in place today. It may not have all of the same legal jargon, but there is a lease today. I think even beyond that, as Ms. Parsons indicated, what you're looking at today is the variance of use that's been presented and not some future potential thing that could happen. So if that parking area were to go away in the future, he would be in violation at that point, and he would have to come back for another variance of
But
use.
could you pain your way into putting enough parking spots on the property you own if you had to?
Yeah, I think can we go back to that slide? I think that would help.
Which one?
Mr. Chair.
Go back one.
Yes.
Justin Kilgore.
Or the-
If I could
the
say
one-
something to Nina real quick. Nina, if the lease is on the OneDrive, if you want to pull it up for him.
That is a really brief lease.
Yeah.
Okay. So Mr. Watts has said if there is a desire to have something more formal, I think this is legally binding. But if there is a desire, he would be happy to put something more formal in place, if that's the major concern.
So if this went away, you just have to park all your people on your lot and you'd have less vehicle storage for the ones you're working on, is that right?
So that's what I was gonna, I think that would help Ms. Fuller a lot, that that one, yes. So if you see, oh, I'm not talking. But if you see where it says 32 vehicles, these are proposed, right? 32 vehicles and then 26 vehicles, kind of like this, right? If Ryan calls me and says, hey, John, I'm going to develop this, let's start talking about moving your cars off, I'm going to reduce that 26 vehicles, which would be on the west side, down to about none. So I would have to cut those off, which is fine, and just move those off site if I have to. Then the employees could park there without a question. Quite honestly, they used to before I moved in there. And they did when I initially started the company.
So could you use this, like where the airplane is? I don't think you have an airplane on there right now.
We do.
Oh, you do?
We lease that, correct, currently to a doctor.
So you could remove that lead. So like all this white space around the fleet building, you could potentially put parking there if you needed to.
Yes, ma'am.
I just want to make sure that like this is feasible if this this lease that could be ended, right now at the property owner. I want to set you up for when.
No, I get it. And we've had those same discussions, and I have those discussions with my police agencies and fire agencies continuously as vehicles arrive, because we cannot control when Ford, Chevy, and Dodge build these things. So we're constantly going, hey, keep your vehicles on site at your agencies. For example, El Paso, Colorado Springs, those get housed at their fleet shops until we're ready. When we're ready, they're brought in and typically graphic, decaled, put on the side, and then rolled into an upfit. Some of the other agencies typically don't have that luxury because they're not close. For example, we do Park County Sheriff's Office, up into Cherry Hills Police Department. Those guys, they can't keep cars on site, and typically that's just too far for them because the dealerships bring them to us. And we have agreements with the dealerships. Hey, if we need to keep these here, we keep them there. So we try to really monitor that because quite honestly, I can't fit that many cars. So.
Any other questions? I've got another one while you're up there regarding access to that fleet building there. It was said, I think Nina said earlier, that your access is off of that taxiway, and I don't know how airports work and who's allowed to drive on taxiways and all that kind of thing, but it seems like having access for a bunch of trucks and stuff off of an airplane taxiway is not a great idea. Is there another way to get there?
That's actually the only way people drive in and out taxiway to get to their hangars. That's what they're used for. We, over learning, we give the right of way to obviously airplanes when they're there, but that is how everybody accesses their hangars. It is considered and used as a normal road.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Nina, that slide number 2 you had up, is that the site plan?
Oh, it's not going back. That one?
Yeah.
Yes, that's correct.
I don't see anywhere there where it says military vehicles only or government
So
vehicles.
I did a zoomed in version because if I did the full, you wouldn't be able to see anything. But I believe that in your staff packet, the full site plan has been included that has all of those notes.
It's also on OneDrive, sir. If
Okay.
you give her a moment, she can probably pull it up for you.
Yeah, can you pull that up? Since I can't operate my thing up here.
We got new technology.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm testing you. Okay, so these are the specific notes that we were referring to. So note number 2 talks about the governmental. Note number 3 provides the limit of no more than 60 non-employee vehicles, which would be those stored vehicles that Mr. Watts was just referring to.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Mr. Markowitz.
So this specifically says heavy trucks, recreational vehicles, and trailers.
Shall only be permitted in association with a governmental contract on the site. So
Right, but what about a passenger vehicle? A police car that's not an SUV doesn't fit into this category. Therefore, my car wouldn't fit into this category and should be allowed to be used, right?
Seems like it should say any vehicle.
we would
Repair.
be perfectly fine with adjusting that if you wanted to, if you choose to make a motion and
Repair-
choose to include that condition,
Repair,
we'd be happy to.
storage, repair, storage of vehicles will be permitted in association with government contract. Do you guys agree that that's straightforward?
It looks like it might be covered in part 1. Passenger vehicles and light trucks.
But it doesn't reference the government only thing there.
Yeah, I don't see that either.
We would have no
Mr.
objection
Markowitz,
if you wanted to.
Hold on to that language for
Yeah.
later.
Is the government thing on that right now?
That's what they're doing today, is only governmental vehicles.
But I thought I heard you say it was on the site plan, and is it on there? And
That was
we're
the-
not seeing it?
That was the note that I was
They're saying
referring
number
to
2
as note
says that,
number
but
2.
but it doesn't cover
Oh.
normal vehicles, cars and
That
pickup
was,
trucks.
for reference, that was the same language that the Planning Commission had come up with during the other hearing that you were referencing, so we just carried the same language over. But we would be happy if you wanted to include that in your motion. We would have no issue whatsoever.
Thank you. Proceed.
Okay, we just included a few photos of some of the vehicles and what that looks like. I'll kind of go through them. I think you have a pretty good understanding of what they do, so I won't go into any detail here. Just to summarize, so they do lights, prisoner partitions, canine equipment, gun racks, emergency communication, reflective, and then they also have on-call services if somebody needs something done. So we actually believe that this is an aviation-related business. As we all know, after 9/11, there became a pretty big focus on security within airports, and many of their clients are airport-related, either businesses or airports themselves. So we think that Watts Upfitting is a part of the critical mission of an airport in ensuring safety and security. This isn't a comprehensive list. This is just a few of them that they provide service to that are airport related. As he mentioned, there are many local agencies as well as agencies throughout the state that they provide service. So I'm going to go through a little bit of background here. Carrie covered this, so I'll just point out a couple of things. The GA overlay does permit several uses. They permit aircraft maintenance facilities. We believe that the impacts associated with their business are very similar to the impacts associated with aircraft maintenance facilities. And then it also permits an aviation-related business, and because they do specifically serve several airports as well as airport-related governmental agencies, we think that they could be considered aviation-related. Carrie covered this. There was, the plat was completed in 1975. It included that plat note restricting them to just hangers and tie downs. And then in 1985, that plat note waiver was approved. There was not any kind of specific condition included within that plat note waiver to state that it was limited to one specific user or one specific type of use. She covered this as well. 2001, the administrative determination allowed for the EW systems, which is that DoD contract. And then you heard from Mr. Watts that they stayed in business until he came into the property in 2018. They were not specifically airport related, as in the maintenance of airplanes or providing something specific that would be added to an airplane. They were related because they provided security and helped train for security. So we believe that this use is very similar because they also assist with ensuring that the airports are secure and our surrounding areas are secure and safe. So they purchased the property, as you heard, in 2021. When they reviewed the title commitment, they found that plat note waiver. When they reviewed the EDARP, well, EDARP didn't exist at that time. Yeah, it did. So when they reviewed EDARP, they found that administrative determination that also indicated that other uses could be allowed because of that plat note waiver. It applied to others. And if it were related to the airport, that it could also be a permitted use. Knowing that they serve airports, they believed that their use was permitted. They had not received any notice of violation, so they purchased in 2021 believing that their use was acceptable. So now I'm going to go into the criteria. Rezoning the property to a commercial zone district probably wouldn't make sense because all of the commercial zone districts allow for uses that may not be compatible with the airport functions. Because of the prior actions on the property, that plat note waiver and the determination when they purchased in 2021, they believed that they were in compliance. They believed that their use was acceptable. So that in itself presents a practical difficulty and hardship. Carrie covered the master plan. I'll just remind you, it's within the area of change, minimal change, undeveloped. And this discusses that you shouldn't alter the essential character. If you look at the character of Meadow Lake Airport, there are many other commercial businesses within the airport, some of which are aviation related, some of which are not. Some of which may have received approval, some of which perhaps could be in violation. But the character of the airport includes light industrial type uses. This is within the employment center place type, which does recommend light industrial uses and specifically calls out Meadow Lake Airport as one of these employment center areas. So criteria 3 has to do with compatibility as well as health, safety, and welfare. So for compatibility, as I indicated, there are many other commercial uses in the vicinity. So from a use-to-use standpoint, they are compatible. The R4 and GAO allow for other commercial uses as well, as you heard from Ms. Parsons, which would include airplane maintenance and other airport-related uses. Their use has very similar impacts to any kind of airplane maintenance facility. Their vehicle trips are actually quite low because they only receive maybe a shipment every 1 to 2 weeks. And then they have the employees coming and going, but it's not large trucks coming every single day.
Mr. Chair, can I ask
Mr. Whitney.
a quick thank you? Ma'am, I'm interested in under compatibility. R4 and GAO allow for commercial uses, including airport maintenance and other airport-supported land uses. And then your description of what's upfitting is not airport-supported, it's airport-related. Do you see a difference between airport-supported and airport related?
I do not see a difference. I was just taking that specific section from the GAO that says airport related, but I myself would see ensuring safety and security of the airport as supporting the airport. So for health, safety, and welfare, Mr. Whitney, that essentially is my point there as well. So they ensure the security of the airport. They also ensure the safety and security of our community as a whole, as well as throughout Colorado, because they have contracts throughout Colorado. So criteria 4, 5, and 6 do not really apply, simply because all structures are existing and they're not proposing any additional improvements. If you have any specific questions on those, I'd be happy to answer them. Otherwise, I'm going to just click on through.
Other questions?
I will at the end, probably for one of these criteria. I just want to hear the rest of the presentation. I'll come back to this.
Okay.
Thank you. So for offsite impacts, there are not anticipated to be any offsite impacts that would exceed what you would expect within the R4 or GAO. There's very limited vehicle trips. There's an average daily trip of 50 ADT, which is below the threshold for even requiring a traffic study per the ECM. We already covered the site plan in pretty great detail, so I'm not going to go through that again. We also covered the number of parking spaces required, so I won't go through that again either. Carrie covered the taxiway easement. They do respect that taxiway easement. They've had issues in the past with people trespassing and parking on their property. They have put up no parking signs. It continues to be a problem with some Meadow Lake Airport Association members, not associated with this business, but others, and so they'll ask them to move when that happens. There's a permitted well and septic on the property. The Falcon Fire Department has indicated no objection. They also did a more recent inspection of the property as well and verified that there are no issues there. They have made payments to Meadow Lake Airport Association for road maintenance, and all improvements have been constructed. So with that, I understand, Mr. Marias, you have a question.
Yeah, going back to the EW systems and what the county allowed, I'm looking at the packet here, and from the September 2001 letter from the county, it says, your letter dated August 21st, 2001 describes businesses which are related to aircraft operations, which are identified in the permitted uses in the OAG overlay district. As a result, the planning department considers the operations conducted by EW Systems as an allowable at the address with the following conditions, and talks about EW interference. But then number 2 says all storage materials and equipment shall be inside a building. But now you're saying that because of that, this should be allowed. But that was allowed under the conditions of, one of the conditions being, hey, you have to store everything inside your buildings.
Mr. Marias, that's not what I'm saying. That's the reason why we're requesting this variance of use today, because that administrative determination, the property owner believed that that applied, and that's why they purchased the property in 2021. But if that same determination applied today, we wouldn't be here.
Okay. And then my second big question, and I'll probably have more afterwards, is I'm looking at this area, and when you look in the land development code for this use, it says that vehicles that are awaiting repair need to follow the outdoor storage guidelines that are also in Chapter 5 of the Land Development Code. In Chapter 5 of the Land Development Code, it says you need a solid fence or wall around your outdoor storage. Where on here is there a solid fence or wall around the outdoor storage?
That's part of the site development plan review and not part of the variance of use review typically. If
But go back to criteria 5. Go back a couple
Sure.
slides to criteria 5. So part of the criteria for us to say yes, go forward,
Yeah.
is saying it's going to comply with all applicable codes. And over here, you're showing us what the site, what the plan looks like. And clearly, it's not, what you're showing us right now is not in compliance with the land development code.
So there is a condition of approval that requires a site development plan to be submitted within 45 days.
Okay.
So that review by staff, I would imagine that they would be reviewing for the Chapter 5 criteria, which would require there to be screening for outside storage.
Okay. And then the last one, if you go back to the site plan, go forward. Yeah, that right there. Actually,
The bigger one?
probably the one that looks more like a graphic, a cartoonish graphic. Okay, so in the bottom right corner off of Cessna Drive, it looks like there is a gate shown.
Correct.
Okay, and so we already talked about the fencing. What prevents? Why would vehicles need to use the taxiways if vehicles can come off of Cessna Drive, which is the private road, come in through that gated fence, and then go into the fleet buildings?
So these are the bays. So the
those are
big,
the
huge,
bays.
yeah, the big, huge doors.
Okay,
So the way that they get into this building is
through there.
through the taxiway.
Okay, so what's in the fleet building over on the left?
The fleet building is also additional repair space. So the way that they get there is through the taxiways as well.
So they come out through between Bay 4 and 7 and the fleet building up to that taxiway, make a left, make another left, and then go in through the entrance over there.
Correct. Because they were previously hangars. So they've got the big, huge, giant doors off of the taxiway. So similar to an airplane coming in and out, as they're coming and going, the vehicles will come in and out. Or the pilots who are going to their airplanes also drive these same taxiways.
Yeah, the pilots that are familiar with the airport.
Well, and I would argue the people that work here all of the time are familiar.
The people that work, yes, I would agree. The people who work there also, the customers that come in, would they have any need to go down the taxiways, or can they just use Cessna Drive?
They would just use Cessna. They have no need to go down the taxiways.
Okay, that's my questions for now.
Are there any other questions?
Anyone else? No, thanks.
Okay, thank you.
Good break.
Staff went ahead and added the language that was requested to the site plan, so I would like to provide that and get a head nod and a verbal agreement from the applicant that this note is acceptable. And then this would then be the site plan moving forward. That way we don't need to add extra conditions. I know I'm going to get there. I can't talk and operate the mouse at the same time. No. I'm almost there. I just lost the mouse color now. Sorry. There it is. Come on. There you go. I went ahead and included SUV because almost all of those photos were SUVs, so. And let me just look to the applicant. Okay. So this would be the revised site plan per this hearing, and this will be attached to the memorandum that goes to the Board of County Commissioners and in the board resolution.
So
Ms. Fuller.
I just want to make sure I understand. So they have to have a site plan for moving forward. Is it different than this site plan?
Correct. So this is the variance of use site plan. The site development plan, when they submit that, if the variance of use will also include, for instance, landscaping, the fencing and screening. It'll have a little bit more detail to it than this. We may have engineering, depending on what details they submit, provide us a small grading plan to make sure that we're addressing any drainage concerns with the site development plan. It just is a little bit more detailed. That is it reviewed internally. It doesn't come before the Planning Commission and the board. And it's pretty typical that the detailed plans are going to come after the variance or the special uses presented.
Okay, thank you.
Well, we'll see it. Mr. Byers.
Does the site development plan, will it require defined storage parking spaces
Yes, sir.
with adequate circulation?
Yes, sir.
So the graphic that we're looking at that just has cars,
It will show the employee and customer spacing and making sure that those are adequate. It will show ADA compliant, but the storage yard that will be screened from adjacent properties, if they can maneuver and park it that way, they can park it that
So
way,
that's
but they
allowed.
will have to show lines, parking spaces, even though they'll be stacked. So I don't know how they pluck them out and move them, but if
yeah,
that's their
I think
operation.
in the photographs, you can see that it's very chaotic.
So the site development plan, they will have to provide actual parking spaces and dimensions of those spaces, sir. Correct.
Mr. Chair.
Yes. Mark Warch.
I apologize if I missed this at the beginning, but, and this is just technical. In our packet, where it lists in the glossary of everything, it says variance of use watts, and then it goes on to describe the natural medicine thing that was on last month. And I just don't know if, I mean,
Where is this?
on the on the main page describing all of this. So like if you just go to the main page of you go to your table of contents, under regular items, it says variance of use watts. Then it says a request by the El Paso County Planning and Community Development, blah, 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 pertains to the standards of natural medicine. So my question probably goes to Ms. Sego, is that because that language has been there, I probably should have brought this up at the very beginning, but since that language is there in our glossary, I was like, okay, where's the airport item? Oh, okay. And then I clicked on it and found it, but
I'm sorry, it's still not clear to me what you're looking
go
at.
go to the table of contents that lists all of our report items.
It's on the agenda.
Is that on passageways?
Yeah, on my tablet. Yeah.
In passage.
Oh, okay. Passageways is not the official agenda.
It's under the staff report.
It is actually on their passageways. It looks like there was a document that's uploaded adjacent to this one in passageways only, not on the agenda, and certainly not in the staff report.
I can certainly pull up passageways. I don't have that open. So,
I mean-
passageways is it's not the official agenda. It's not.
Okay, so what was posted for public
So
for
what was
this
posted for
hearing
public consumption
was
did
correct.
not. Yes. Yes.
Okay, I mean, that was my thing, is I just wanted to make sure that this language didn't confuse somebody out there and think, hey, we're not talking
Sneaking
about the
mushroom
airport today,
approval
we're
in.
talking about natural medicine.
Right. Right. No, that
So-
was not on the agenda. That's on the website.
If council's okay with it, then I'm okay.
All right.
Okay.
Are you done?
I am done. If
Any
there are
other
no
questions?
questions for me. I don't see passageways, so I was like, I'm not sure what they're talking about.
I have one last question.
Yes, Mr. Moraes.
Just out of curiosity, what do you consider the front of the property, the rear of the property, and all that?
Great question. So I would suggest that the front of the property is from Cessna Drive because it's our most physical road versus the taxiway. So the rear then would be the outdoor storage area that will need to be completely screened in. And then to the north would be the side, and then the employee parking to the south.
Okay,
Just the side.
So I'll leave you with this, but before we hear from the public and kind of look it over, is just take a look at outdoor storage inside the land development code and about vehicles that exceed the height of the fencing.
Correct. So the variance of use, you're permitting the location of this parking that close to the property line and that tight with this variance of use. It is tied to this variance of use map. So these cars are where they're going to be. These SUVs are where they're going to be. So there's no additional setbacks going to be depicted on the site development plan.
So the concept, so I'm just reading through the concept says if vehicles exceed the height of the fencing, they shall be stored at the rear third of the property.
Correct. You are looking at a variance of use, very unique. So this is it. So you're not going through a regular outside storage proposal that wouldn't come to you as an allowed use, that we would get a site development plan and make it meet, it would have to meet the code. This variance of use is setting the location of these outdoor storage areas. So you're correct. 7 feet is as tall as we can go as a fence without it becoming a structure. So on some of these larger strategic,
Yeah. The
You're
big
go-
RVs, the recreational
you
vehicles.
probably are going to see them over the fence. That is correct, sir.
Okay.
And it's very unlikely that you're going to have fencing along a taxiway because it's a taxiway. So when I'm looking at this, if I'm reviewing this as staff, I'm looking at the area to the west or at the bottom of the screen and the very area to the south and then the very to the north. That is where your fence lines are.
Could you go to the other?
Yes.
Could you go one slide back up?
Yeah.
And just say, if you were to review this when the site development plan comes up.
So right here is where they have an airplane parked. So we would look, I mean, I imagine that the fencing would be along these lines here, screening the adjacent properties.
Okay.
But I can't imagine fencing here because that's where the taxiway is. That doesn't make
But
sense.
the outdoor storage
Would be fenced.
would be fenced.
But again, if they park those larger vehicles there, you're likely going to see
Go
them.
and see 'em
Correct.
over the fence.
Yes, sir.
Which if this was not a variance of use, if this was just an outdoor storage somewhere else in El Paso County, we would say, hey, if they're over the fence line, you need to park them in the back third of your lot.
That is very correct, sir. Or they would have to go through a process to modify and waive that requirement from the land development code, sir.
You do a waiver.
Ms. Parsons, can you bring up that proposed language again, the language you changed on the?
Oh, yes,
site
sir.
plan?
I hope I didn't close it.
Ms. Segal, if I get your input on this, as it pertains to the word only.
I wasn't following the conversation. Can you repeat the question?
Yeah. So in this item number 2 here on the site plan, this is the proposed change to the language to limit the repair vehicles to only government, those associated with government contracts. My question is, and so that's my perceived goal through Mr. Markowitz and myself, would be that there needs to be a restriction that this is only, the repair of vehicles is only related to those being worked on under a government contract. If I had written this language, I would have put the word only after permitted. But my question to you is, where the word only is now, does that restrict the repair of vehicles to only those under a government contract?
In my opinion, it does, but there's also no harm in moving it if you're more comfortable with that. People's interpretations of language varies, so if you want it after permitted, I think that's fine. I think it's fine where it is.
Okay.
Do you want me to move it?
I'd like you to.
Okay, give me, can
Thank
you
you.
give me 3 minutes?
And have we heard from the applicant yet as to whether this language is okay with them? Are we getting a thumbs up? Great. Thank you. All right, can we take a little break here? Come back in 8 minutes at 10:35. Looks like we have everybody ready. We'll call back into order.
All right. During the break, there was a question as to comparative size for the property. So this is the property, 2.25 acres that the buildings, the outdoor storage area is on. This large property here is the property where the off-site parking and the informal lease is occurring. I cannot pull the acreage up because the GIS is stuck at the assessors, but in reference, if I had to guess, I'd say this is about 3 acres compared to 2.25 acres. Does that answer your question, Ms. Jack? Okay, thank you. And then the other business on your screen is the fixed note with only after the word permitted for note number 2 on the variance of use site plan.
Thank you. All right, now is our time for public comment. Is there anyone in the audience who'd like to speak in favor of this item? Come up one at a time and give us your name and sign in and give us your name.
Good morning. My name is Essie Sund. I own 2 commercial properties adjacent to Watts's property. First, I would like to thank each of you for giving me the opportunity to speak in favor of Watts Upfitting, John and Caitlin Watts. Their business is a perfect example of a successful, locally owned small business. Watts supports our city, our county, our state, and large government entities. They are a small business, not a large corporation, that can just pick up and move and not miss a beat in business. They are a family-owned small business, and if a variance is not approved, it would affect the local agencies and families, not just Watts's family, but the many employees that rely on their success to support their families. I am proud to have a commercial property adjacent to their property. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to stand before you and for listening with not just your ears, but with your hearts. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Tara Porter, and my husband and I own a very large home inside of the airport off of Cessna Drive. We also have an attached hangar to our home that has our airplane. My husband is the pilot, and he does fly quite frequently. We do tend to use that taxiway that John Watts' business is adjacent to, that people drive in, and we have never had any problems with using that taxiway. I really appreciate that John Watts and Caitlin Watts are here fighting for their business. We've never had any problems with their business. They've been very kind and very wonderful people. And I just hope that they're able to stay.
Great. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thanks. Anyone else that'd like to speak in favor of this item? Seeing none, we'll move to the next section, which is anyone who'd like to speak against this item. Come on up and sign in and state your name, please.
Good morning. Dave Elliott. I'm from the Meadow Lake Airport Association, president of the board of directors. Can we put the, speak loud. Can we put up the PowerPoint? I guess I can stand over here, right? Where I can see it. And then how do I work it?
And you can just move these buttons back and forth and you'll get there.
I apologize for my voice, and I'm sucking on a cough drop. It's not COVID. Just a quick review. 1965 is when the Conover family did the Meadow Lake Estates filing number 1. In 1966, they started working with some folks that were employees about creating an airport in the next section of land. And by 67, they had drugged the first runway, built a couple of hangars, and by 69, they decided this was going to work, and they created the Meadow Lake Airport filing number 1 in 1970. That original filing 1 listed as plat notes what lots were going to be dedicated to what usage. That was kind of a dream. I've talked to Gary Conover as recently as a week ago, and they really had no idea what they were doing with an airport or that it would grow like it has. They're still amazed at what happened. We're all amazed with what happened out there. In 81, they submitted an application to convert the agricultural zoning to R4 and GA overlay, and then the Board of County Commissioners also approved the resolution. The R4, just to review quickly, first of all, is obsolete. I'm not really sure what that means. I've been out there 30 years. I've done 5 hangar complexes, and we were always told, don't worry about the R4, it's obsolete. Just whatever the GA overlay did is the precedent. And in fact, that's what the next one, the GA overlay says that. When the standards conflict with the underlying base zoning, whether or not it's obsolete or not, doesn't matter because the GA overlay zoning district will always govern. This is what it looked like in 1986, right after the GA overlay and the R4 zoning were approved for Meadow Lake Airport. That's actually a little bit large for a typical country airport. Normally, Lyman, Lamar, airports like that have 1, maybe 2 runways and half a dozen hangars, 20 or 30 airplanes. It's unusual for a general aviation airport to have more than 100 airplanes. This is Meadow Lake today. 475 airplanes as of December. 763 acres, 450 additional acres that have through the fence access to the runway complex. The FAA does not like through the fence operations because, as we see in this case, the Airport Operating Authority loses control over the land use of those through the fence properties that come onto the airport. The authority for that land use reverts back to the governing authority for the area, in this case, El Paso County. We have responsibility for it, but we don't have authority over it. We, the Meadow Lake Airport Board of Directors. We have 3 runways, we have 2 instrument approaches, and an instrument obstacle departure procedure. How did that happen? How did the growth occur? Well, in 1989, people liked the idea that they could own their property, build a hangar, build their own airplane. And so Meadow Lake really started to grow. By 1989, they applied for, solicited reliever status from the FAA, which entitled Meadow Lake to become eligible for Airport Improvement Program grants. We're one of 19 airports in the U.S. that gets federal funding for capital improvement. By 2003, Colorado statutes were amended to include reliever airports, which included Meadow Lake. Actually, it was only Meadow Lake right now in Colorado that are also eligible for Colorado discretionary aviation grants. In 2013, El Paso County approved Appendix B, Matters of State Interest, to the Land Development Code, specifically for Meadow Lake, because as you'll see in a minute, the Colorado statutes refer to Meadow Lake as a matter of state interest. And in 2023, under Director Harrington, we got our 1041 permit. Since 1990, Meadow Lake Airport has accepted 32 FAA grants for over $10 million, 24 Colorado grants for over $4.5 million. The significance of these is that we have an obligation to the FAA and the state to protect their investment in the airport. And that's what those assurances, the grant assurances are. So in 2016, the FAA published their policy about non-aeronautical use of hangars. In the section on frequently asked questions, what kind of uses are permitted? What kind of uses are not permitted? And they refer to the grant assurances under the 14 CFR federal regulations as their authority to do this. So it says, what is the primary purpose of a hangar? It's to store airplanes. I'm not going to read the slides, I'll put them up. So what uses are not permissible under this policy? Now, I've added the red lines in here just to make the ones stand out that are not permissible. Under the FAA rules, we have to have an airport layout plan. That's part of the master plan of the airport. And we can have non-aeronautical usages. And when the FAA looks at an aeronautical use, they mean something that directly supports airplanes. Putting lights and sirens and radios in a vehicle does not support airplanes, even though that vehicle is going to be used by the airport. That's not an aeronautical use. Another example, right now we're negotiating with the Falcon Aerolabs to develop a ground lease of 3 to 5 acres to build an aviation STEM high school. Under the FAA rules, that's not an aeronautical use. It doesn't directly support airplanes. So since it's on the airport, I will have to have their permission to enter into that ground lease for the guys to build the high school. We can have a crash station. We can lease property to the Falcon Fire Department for another substation over on the east side of the airport that we're not using for runway purposes. But I would have to have FAA permission to do that because it's on the airport property. The property we're talking about here is through the fence. So in this case, this variance request is on property that is not under the control of the FAA. But their guidance to us still applies under the grant assurances that we attempt to work with the governing authority to make sure that their guidance is adhered to. The area that the airport includes, and we look at the airport as being all the properties that have access to the runway complex. It's actually a little bit larger than the slide that Carrie had put up first. So all of the purple area includes the 43 residential lots that have residential through the fence access to the airport. That's a whole different set of guidelines under the FAA rules. And of course, then what it comes down to is the airport influence area. And under Colorado statutes, 43-10-113, governing entities with zoning and building permitting authorities shall adopt and enforce at a minimum rules and regulations to protect the land areas defined in 14 CFR Port 77. That's El Paso County. Now we've got to work with it. We have the obligation to the FAA to work with the county to come up with these rules. But that's really what we need to come down to. Of course, we don't have to remind the county commissioners of this, but they are a subdivision of the state to enforce what the general legislature from the state has decreed, and they've already decreed that we have to do this. One of the big concerns that I have is if you do entertain the thought of approving this variance, is that you're working on information, the R4 and the GA overlay, that's 40 years out of date. As I've already shown, we've progressed beyond that simple airport that was approved in 1981. We're a lot larger and we have other influences in the whole area. So I think if you're going to look at approving this, you might consider delaying it, tabling it until the update to the Land Development Code comes out. After the last one with AccuFix, I approached Ms. Harrington about offering to work with the consultant to update the Land Development Code because the GA overlay and the R4 are woefully out of date. So how can we look at a future long-term variance based on stuff that's 40 years old when we're already working on an update to it? The real challenge, the Transportation Research Board, the National Academies of Science, publishes advanced cooperative research reports. Report number 114 is the guidebook for through the fence operations. And I took these quotes right out of the book. We have a challenge with personal property rights. I mean, obviously, you own property, you have a right to enjoy the peaceful enjoyment of that property. However, incompatible land use can affect the neighbors. And in this in this particular instance, there's no question that what Watts Outfitting does is a valuable asset to the community. And as a small business owner myself, I'm really impressed with the way he's grown his business. But at this point, he'd be a real good launch customer for the Meadow Lake Industrial Park on the southeast side of the airport, which would be a compatible land use for that area. His growth on the airport is really creating problems. Questions?
Mr. Markwich.
You mentioned that this property is not within the fence, but it's still under airport jurisdiction, or are you just speaking as a neighbor? I mean, I guess I'm confused as to.
I have a responsibility to the FAA and the state for the administration of the property. I don't have any authority to do it.
So is this property on the airport?
Well, it depends on how you define airport. The county definition of airport is the runway complex and all areas where people get in and get out of their airplane, where the airplanes refuel, where the airplanes are serviced and maintained. The airport property, the formal ownership airport property is, well, actually on this side where the hangar complex is, the eastern edge of the pavement on the parallel taxiway is the edge of our airport property. For administrative purposes, we consider all of the properties that have access to the airport as being part of the airport.
So are they part of the airport association?
Yes. The way Meadow Lake was set up, by owning personal property that has airport access, you are eligible, well, we require that you be a member of the Meadow Lake Airport Association. The Meadow Lake Airport Association owns and operates the runway complex. We have responsibility for the hangar complex, and we make inputs to building permits, development plans. We don't have any authority in that, but we advise the county on whether or not that hangar or that development fits into the scheme of airport management and administration.
During the last item that I had mentioned, and you actually just mentioned, I believe you said AccuRide or
AccuFix.
AccuFix. I believe your association was in approval or was in agreement with that variance. Is that correct?
A little bit of difference. Well, two things. Number one, they were asking forgiveness. Somebody else had filed a code violation against them. We didn't even know about it. We didn't know who it was or what the violation was. But they were asking forgiveness, and they have been a good member of the association. And John Watts has been a good member of the association too. Although I've received numerous complaints about various activities on Watts, blocking taxiways, kicking airplanes out of the hangars to expand his business, various things. But in John's case, he's asking permission. That's a whole different connotation within the FAA world. I can't give permission for a non-aeronautical use, even through the fence area.
Thank you.
Ms. Jackson.
So how much of this area is privately owned? It's all personal property with the exception of the runways and the taxiways and those things, and your buildings, is that correct?
Correct. The airport-owned property is 763 acres, includes 2 hangars that we have purchased. One is our flight school and fixed base operator, the people that serve the public, and the other one is our activities building. All of the other hangars, 445 hangar units, are on privately owned property and have through the fence access to the runway complex. And there's also 43 residential lots that have airport access.
And are they complaining about this business?
Some do.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you, sir. Any other folks that would like to speak against this item?
My name's Dan Jaco. I'm an owner of a few hangars in Meadow Lake Airport. I don't do well in front of people. Anyway. wrong email address. As far as Watts is concerned, John has really got a great business. He's done really well. Who would complain against him? I mean, that's probably why nobody has said anything to code enforcement, because he's such a nice guy. But you can't park 60 to 80 vehicles on an airport such as this without having an impact on the airport. As Dave said, there's been complaints about taxiways being blocked. Of course, he takes care of it whenever you can get a hold of somebody to move the vehicle, but still it's an inconvenience to the airplane owner. The airplane owner has no place else to go. John does with his business. We're restricted as airplane owners to an airport. So the airplane owner has to be at the airport. And then I understand that John evicted several people out of their hangars when he bought the property for his business, which can't blame him for doing that. His business is growing. But where'd those people go? They didn't have any other place to go. At Meadow Lake, because we've got like 50 people on the hangar wait list, just waiting for another hangar to come up. One of the things that I heard the last time I was here, which was for the AccuFix hearing on their variance, was that somebody said, there's a real mess out at Meadow Lake. It's not our responsibility to clean it up. Well, under 4310.113, which Dave stated, government entities with zoning and building permit authority shall adopt and enforce at a minimum rules and regulations to protect the land areas defined as 14 CFR Part 40 or Part 77. So we don't have any enforcement unless it's you guys. You guys are the enforcement to protect the airport. John has said that he's outgrown his property, and we agree, that, okay, it's only going to grow from here on, and as far as finding other places to park vehicles, that's fine if you do, but where are you going to park those vehicles when the truck comes in and they drop them off at the property? Anyway, that's all I have to say.
Thank you, sir.
Morning. I'm Michael Barb, hangar owner at Meadow Lake, and until recently a member of the board of directors. Three things I'd like to cover today. Let's take a look at aviation. Let's divide it into military, commercial, and civilian. Probably not correct, but let's look at it that way. Several years ago, back in the 80s, obviously, when you're dealing with aviation, the government is a big player. In fact, it's a supreme player. General aviation was accused of not providing their monies. Commercial aviation was providing all the money. Military does their own thing. So what happened was those of us in general aviation, AOPAA, EAA, those different organizations said, well, tax us some more. So I think it's about 6 cents a gallon aviation tax now to support monies, to provide monies for general aviation. Well, nobody says that John Watts is not a nice person. He's got a great business out there. He shows up, and here's what happens. Those bays you saw out there were, in fact, hangars. They're no longer hangars.
He now needs them for his business, so he no longer has airplanes out there. So that's 7 less airplanes that are now someplace else. Okay? Is that really a big factor? New rules coming up that says the following. What they're going to look at now on the FAA, they're going to look at airplane usage. If you have a lot of usage, you get a lot of money. If you don't have a lot of usage, you don't get a lot of money. Well, those are 7 airplanes that are no longer going to use this airport, which means John directly affects how much money we're going to get. Now, he's got a great business. Does it have to be on an airfield? Like Dan Jaco said, that we can't go anyplace else. He can. He wants a variance to put a very large business onto an airport that's really not suitable. His variance has 2 things on it, 40 to 60 cars. We did an aerial survey of it, and he had somewhere between 80 to 83 cars out there. He's coming apart at the seams. Okay? Several months back, I'm moving an airplane up Cessna Drive, which is both a road and a taxiway. I'm towing an airplane up there. Coming off taxiway Echo, I do a right-hand turn on the road. Pulling an airplane is not a real fun thing. It's a tricycle gear airplane, and tricycles have their way to go one way when you want to go the other way. So I'm paying more attention to what's behind me than what's in front of me. I look out there, make sure Cessna Road is somewhat clear. I make the turn heading north up Cessna Drive there. And suddenly I look up there, and here is a car hauler, portable parking lot, whatever you want to call it, unloading cars to John Watts' facility. Now I'm stuck. I'm about 300 feet up the road from the taxiway. Now there are 2 cars back behind me. I have to stop, get out, say, guys, you got to get your car out from behind me here because I got to back this airplane up. Okay, get out, disconnect my tow vehicle, do a 180-degree turn, and now try to back this thing about 200 feet back down the road. Now, you ever seen a little kid trying to initially back his tricycle up? Not a lot of fun. That's the impact John has on the airport. You know, he's just got too much for what he's got, where he's got. You know, he's got no business on the airport. You know, we've had a let live and let live, and he's tried to help us on several occasions. You know, really aviation is not his thing. On the plat note there, it shows 2 things. Up on the south end, it showed, and I think this is the variance, it showed a whole lot of parking spots on the very south side. I don't have it up here. Okay, right now, talking to the owner of that property, he's got a deal with John to rent a space for 10 cars. I think if you'll go ahead and count, there's something like 53 spots there. So you're getting ready to give a variance to somebody else's property. Can you do that? Here's a question I have for you. I don't know. You made a big deal about John doing business with the government. Why? Does it make any difference if he's dealing with the government or if he has 60 good humor vehicles in there? What is the hang up with doing business with the government? Granted, I guess it's a public service, making a lot of money off the government, putting decals on police vehicles. But what does his relationship with the government have to do with his variance on Meadow Lake Airport? Can anybody explain that to me, please?
Not a time for questions right now, sir. We hear your question.
Okay. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in the audience who'd like to speak against this item? Seeing none, applicant, would you like to come back up and rebut?
Thank you. Nina Reese with Vertex. I wrote down a few points here. I'll go through them one at a time. Dave Elliott referenced that the R4 does not apply. We wouldn't be going through this process if the current zoning did not apply. So I don't think that that's probably valid. There was also a slide that was brought up regarding the FAA and uses that the FAA doesn't recommend or permit. If you notice, there were many other uses included, one of which included residences, which we know there are residences permitted within the airport. And it was referred to later on in that same presentation that people live on the airport and have hangars. So I don't know that that's valid necessarily. There was a few different references to the CRS 14 Part 77. Some of you may know, but this has to do with conical surfaces. So that's airspace. And so that is stating that the jurisdiction has the obligation to ensure that the airspace is protected. There's a height limitation within the zone district. They're not proposing any new structures, so there is no issue with Part 77 because that's airspace. There were statements regarding the growth of the business and that it has created problems. I didn't hear anything specific that was brought up except for that one taxiway incident to where the business has caused issues. I verified with Mr. Watts that that taxiway issue occurred actually many years ago, and that was with a prior client that they no longer do business with because it was an issue. So they do care about the airport and the airport operations, so they stopped doing work with that client, knowing that that was an issue. There were some statements regarding parking and the fact that there being parking in the airport is a conflict. Every time I've ever gone to an airport, there are vehicles parked. As long as those vehicles are not within taxiway areas and they are driving on the designated roadways, there's no conflict with vehicles being parked within an airport area or around an airport. There was also discussion regarding airplanes being kicked out and the fact that he is not utilizing the previous hangar areas for airports. Meadow Lake Airport Association keeps a list of people looking for hangar space. In 2022, prior to expanding his business, he actually sent an email out to everyone included within that list to see if they had a desire to go into his space before he expanded. The responses that he received, people were looking for custom airport hangar areas, more like man caves, and he does not have that. He doesn't include, a heated space with bathrooms and things like that. So that's why he chose to expand, because he might as well expand his business versus having vacant hangars. So I believe I addressed most of the points. Are there any questions?
Any questions?
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
I'm not sure, Ms. Ruiz, whether this should be directed to you or directed to Ms. Parsons or directed to Ms. Harrington or who this should be directed to, but I'm wrestling with, first of all, the conflict between a gated zoning, R4, if you want to call it that, and the conflict between that and GAO or overlay, which controls, number one. Then there's a reference to, several people have made a reference to the county adopting regulations or rules that address this issue. I don't know what the status of that is at the moment. So I'm trying to figure out who's in charge. I know we're here on a zoning variance, but the question is, what rules apply to this application?
Great question. And so an overlay does not undo the underlying zoning. So the GA overlay is no different than the CAD or the Commercial Airport District overlay that the Colorado Springs Airport has. You have applications come before you that are zoned or proposed to be rezoned. Those overlays are overlays. The underlying zoning can change. It can stay the same. You can approve variances or special uses on them, subdivisions. So both apply. That is also very similar to what you see when you see a WSEO overlay. We talk about if this overlay happens, does it change the underlying zoning? Nope. All of those rules are still applicable.
But could I ask you, ma'am, but what happens if the underlying zoning and the overlay conflict? In other words, if you've got a particular zoning, but the overlay makes that zoning incompatible with the overlay, what controls?
Wasn't there language we saw that said that
Yeah.
the overlay
Controls.
takes precedent?
Yes, it did.
If they're in conflict?
Yeah, I saw that, and that's why I'm asking.
I'm not going to use the MBA or the airport. Let me look in the land development
Yeah,
code.
sure, no.
I prefer to look at that. So if you can
Yeah.
give me a couple minutes, I'll
No,
give
you
you an
bet.
answer.
And I'm not trying to be a problem. I'm trying to figure out how the heck we get to where we're trying to get here. Because it wouldn't, I mean, if the overlay is presumably there for a purpose, a safety purpose, a health purpose, a business purpose, or whatever, and if that conflicts with particularly a dated zoning, which the county doesn't even recognize anymore, if I understand.
May I?
Yes,
So
please.
that's not exactly accurate. So
Okay.
this property is zoned R4, and
Right.
we have several R4 properties located throughout the county. And folks can come in and develop under those original R4 guidelines.
Okay.
It's just the state adopted PUD, and so R4 went away, and now you see PUD, but they're very similar in terms of the objective of customized zoning specific to an individual legal descriptive area. Does
Thank
that
you for
help
that.
with
Yes,
that?
it does.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Now, wouldn't this variance, if granted, apply to the GAO overlay as well?
So a variant, I'm not sure I understand the question, but I will try to answer it. The variance is a variance to both the requirements of the R4 and the GAO. It's a variance from the zoning requirements as they apply to the property, and that would be, in this case, R4 and GAO.
Right, thank you. I don't know that you need to look anything up.
Okay.
Thanks.
I'll look it up just for my own edification,
right.
so offline we can have the answer.
All right. Ms. Fuller?
So I want to get my arms around the hangar space availability, because I do think that there's a good public policy that we do want to have airports and supporting uses for airports, and this does pull away from land that's available, and it's not like you can just put that anywhere. And so what I'm hearing from Meadow Lake is that there's 50 people waiting for a space, but what I'm hearing from you is that that whole email list was put out and they want bougie space, and that's not what's being offered. I could also hear the argument, well, they also want free space. So I'm not trying to say that the applicant would need to meet that. I'm concerned about losing the ability for others to use the airport. So it's like, are there lots of other parcels of land that have hangars? Can you just kind of go into depth on that for me, please?
Sure. I'm not aware that there are any free hangars in the airport because it's private property. Why would you do that? There is additional land available. I see Carrie has this nice map. Let me just. Okay. So as you can see in the Meadow Lake Airport area, so the whole entire area, there is lots of vacant land where hangars have not yet been constructed. I don't know this for a fact, but I would imagine that if there was a great need, people like to make money, so they might be constructing additional hangars to make money off of their vacant land.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Mr. Tribridge.
Ms. Ruiz, in the applicant's letter of intent, there's a table showing business usage out there. Did you put that together?
Yes, I did.
Okay.
That
Can you talk me through that?
Sure.
In terms of, there's a list of 22 businesses. Is that all of the various businesses that are on Meadow Lake, or is that limited to a specific geographic area here on the map? How did you build that
Sure.
list?
I would imagine this is not a comprehensive list, just because I don't work or live on the airport, so I don't know as much as others. This list is just based upon looking at Google and reviewing what businesses show up on Google and then verifying that they still exist, so finding an associated website.
I gotcha. Okay, so and as I was reviewing this and making notes of the 22 businesses there, only about half of them seem to be airport related. I see 5 other commercial shops in there, 3 contractor equipment yards, and then a smattering of other things like a battery company and stuff. So it would seem to me that this variance would be compatible with the character of this immediate area in the airport.
Yes, I would agree with that.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Thanks.
I should have stated earlier, but the public comment time is closed. The applicant has responded. Any discussion? Mr. Moraes?
I do. I look in the land development code and I look under the GAO district in chapter 4, and it talks about, how it's supposed to apply to different airports. But it actually, out of all, the private airports for general aviation in the county, it does call out Meadow Lake specifically. And it calls out, there are use restrictions for Meadow Lake. And it was the ones we saw up on the screen, the aero clubs, the aircraft maintenance, the landing strips, the control towers, et cetera, et cetera. And if the county at the time of writing this really wanted to be wishy-washy on what was to be used in a general aviation overlay district at Meadow Lake, they wouldn't have included Meadow Lake. That kind of makes sense. They're actually calling out this specific airport. No other airports that could have a GAO in the county except for this one. And they're saying this is what is allowed in that airfield. So I think that when you start going, hey, should the variance of use be allowed? You almost reach this threshold that you're kind of going, well, now it's you got to meet this almost like a higher bar in the sense of allowable uses. I look at the condition, the review criteria, if we could bring those back up on the screen. And where I see this is not meeting that threshold of the review criteria is I still don't see the hardship. I still don't see the hardship. The case made about why does this variance of use meet the hardship that's there. And that's number 1. The strict application of the provisions of this code will result in peculiar, exceptional, practical difficulty or undue hardship. I don't see it. I see it as a very successful business, and maybe they're a victim of their own success, but to me, it doesn't meet there. When I look at it right now, addressing all the off-site impacts, I don't see it meeting that either. And then the site plan for the proposed variance of use will provide adequate parking, traffic circulation, fencing. The site plan that was provided, to me, doesn't do that just yet. And they said, yeah, there'll be a site development plan that comes later, but this is underneath this criteria approval for this variance. And it says the site plan for the proposed variance of use addresses all these things. Well, I don't see it just yet in this product that's been presented to us today in front of us to make the decision today in front of us. So that's why I'll be against this variance of use.
Thank you. Mr. Whitney?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I have compatibility concerns Mr. Trowbridge's good comments notwithstanding, because the question I have, I guess, and I'm not sure we have the answer, I saw that those in opposition went down that list and took a look at the ones that were aircraft or airport related or aeronautically related. The question to me, though, is how many of those businesses that don't meet the criteria, arguably, are operating under a variance or simply haven't been complained about or simply are out of sight and out of mind? In other words, I don't know whether it makes sense to double down on a use that may not be appropriate just because there are other such uses out there. They're out there and they should be subject to complaint, or they're operating under a variance or something. But I think to continue a problem is not, I know it falls on this particular applicant, but to me, to continue a problem, if that's the case, isn't the right way to go. And I do want to say, for what it's worth, in my mind, this has nothing to do with the quality of the business or the importance of the business, and I notice the opposition is careful to do the same. This is a spectacular business. This is not about what, it's about where. And I'm not sure doubling down on where makes sense here to me. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any other comments? Mr. Schulte?
I echo the same as Mr. Whitney and Mr. Moraes. Where it's at on the airport, the business is good. Getting a small business here in Colorado Springs, taking it from the big brother up in Denver is great. They've grown. But the compatibility part, or even talking about, well, we argue that this is used for aeronautic stuff because they're upfitting security vehicles for airports. I just don't think that gets there because, if I'd stretch it and say there was a bakery there and they supplied bread to the Colorado Springs Airport in Denver along with their 50 other customers, it just doesn't meld there because their majority of their customers are not the airports and stuff. And so, yeah, I just think the compatibility, it's not really a airport use, supported use. And so with that, I wouldn't be supporting this either.
Ms. Fuller?
Yeah, and I agree with Mr. Shipples and the other speakers as well. I think it's an incredibly large stretch to call this an aviation-related business. I agree, it's a wonderful business and a huge, important business to our community. But I'm in agreement that I'm not seeing the hardship and the compatibility.
Any other comments? Discussion? Mr. Markowitz?
One of the things that we're undertaking and going through right now is a revision of our code. And one of the reasons that we're doing that is to have, in some cases, more flexibility, but in some cases, more predictability as to what's going to be in certain areas. And I think that this airport is a perfect example of it should have been done in the first place, where none of these businesses that are non-airport related should have been in there. And I just think that we're just causing additional problems by offering additional variances that are not airport related. And I hope that in the code revision that we're going to be doing, I hope that we come up with a better solution than having R4 on here that really doesn't mean anything anymore. So I'm going to be, and I do also echo, it sounds like a great business. It sounds like it's well needed and everyone, I think, supports that. I just think it needs to be in a different spot. And I don't know if there are other facilities on the airport property. You mentioned an industrial space that is adjacent. Maybe moving across the airport to an available space would be an option. I don't know what that all entails. That's not our job. But I do think that approving this would just continues the problems out there. And I think that what we should be doing is nipping those problems in the bud, especially in the process of this code rewrite. So I'll be against.
Mr. Trowbridge.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to challenge my fellow commissioners about the hardship discussion. This business has been operating in this location for 6 years and has grown. And the idea that he could just pick it up and move it across town somewhere quickly is it's unimaginable to me that you think that he could do that quickly. I mean, a move like that takes a lot of planning, takes not just the site search to find a compatible location, but then to move all the equipment. I have no idea what's involved in all the work that he does, but that obviously there's a lot of equipment, supplies, materials, tools that would have to be moved. That would take a significant amount of time. So I think it would be a hardship on the business to do that. And as I said before, there's other commercial entities operating out there already. We heard that there were no code complaints against this business in the 6 years it's been there. Yes, there have been issues from time to time. Sounds like to me that they were related to people who weren't actually at the business, that they were perhaps customers or others that weren't familiar with the parking and such out there. And whenever, I believe we heard people say that whenever something was brought to Mr. Watt's attention, he addressed it swiftly. So it sounds like he's a good tenant. Meadow Lake Airport Association themselves have been aware of this, and they haven't filed any code complaints, and didn't hear anything about any code complaints against the other commercial businesses that were there. So I challenge some of that. As far as the land development code changes, yes, we are working on that, but that's not where we are today. We have to take this application as it's presented to us today, with the code we have today, and with the plans and such that were presented to us today. I can agree that you can disagree that the site development plan isn't sufficient and that you don't like it, and that's fine. I think it's fine to disagree about that. But as far as the overall variance, I think it should be approved.
Thank you. Ms. Jackson.
I know there'll be more discussion maybe afterwards, but I'd like to make a motion, please.
Please do.
Okay. Mr. Chair, with regards to agenda item 5A, file number VA 247 for a variance of use for Watts variance of use with 4 conditions, 2 notations. Water is provided by on-site. I recommend approval and send this to the Board of County Commissioners for their consideration.
Second.
Thank you. And are we making that motion with the updated language to the site plan?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you. And the conditions and notations. Any other discussion before we vote? I'd like to add my 2 cents. I think there is, had this been coming to us as a new business coming into the airport, I'd probably be in agreement with some of my cohorts here. But, this business has been here for 6 years, no complaints. There is an issue out at the airport with these other uses that are not, technically allowed. I think we should do as much as we can to help rectify that. But we've got a business here that's been there for 6 years and not seemingly caused much trouble in the process. So I think it's the very definition of exceptional hardship for this property owner to be expected to just close his business and move somewhere else and then have to try and sell the property, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I think we are trying to protect the goals of the airport by limiting this variance to the current owner and to restricting it to just military vehicles. And the gentleman asked, what's that got to do with anything? To me, that lowers significantly the number of vehicles that'll be going in and out of there. If it were just a wide open vehicle repair shop, you'd have a lot of people going in and out on a daily basis, much more than is here. So I certainly support the variance as stated. Any other comments? Take the vote. Mr. Markowitz.
Nay.
Mr. Schipple.
Nay.
Mr. Trowbridge.
Aye.
Ms. Fuller.
I found my fellow commissioners to be quite persuasive. I'm going to be an aye.
Ms. Jackson.
Aye.
John Fournier. Great. Sorry. Mr. Whitney. What was that?
Nay.
No. Okay. Mr. Byer?
Nay.
Mr. Moraes?
Nay.
That is 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah. And the chairman votes aye. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it passes. This item.
Nope. Fails 5-4.
Oh, it wasn't. Let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2. You're right. I'm sorry. The item fails by a vote of 5 against and 4 in favor. Yes.
I would like to comment that Mr. Graham wrote a letter to the planning commissioners, and for anyone that ever puts in comments, this is a really well-written letter because it's really focusing on the review criteria and how these decisions are made. And a lot of times we see things that aren't part of the review criteria, which is how we make our decisions. And so I'd like to applaud the quality of this letter. And it didn't go Mr. Graham's way. Oh, no, it went his way. But I think that this is probably a nice template if anyone has oppositions or in favor, a good template to use for going forward.
Any other comments? Any other business? There was something on our agenda. We're doing the drainage today? All right. Come on up, whoever's doing that. And before you start speaking, let me just reiterate that agenda item 5A, VA 247, variance of use for Watt, variance of use failed to pass by a vote of 5 against and 4 in favor.
Morning, Commissioners. Planning Commission, Jeff Rice with Engineering. And we also have online Blair Greiman with our consultant Stantec, who'll do the main presentation. I have a quick presentation on the master plan elements, which is addressed in the staff report also. Just let me pull up the other presentation so we have it ready here. Well, it's 2024 folders. My mouse, it's acting funny. Okay, is it working? These first slides are just an overview of the drainage basin planning study as being a component of the master plan. This is the Jimmy Camp Creek Drainage Basin Planning Study. Christina Reddy was the project manager for the county, the consultant is Stantec, and I've been helping with technical issues and writing actually parts of the fee portion, which is a follow-up report that would come to the Board of County Commissioners. If anybody's watching remotely and wants to have comments, please email your information to pcdhearings@elpasoco.com. So the authority for the county, this is the Planning Commission adoption of the Master Development Drainage Plan as part of the master plan. And this addresses that the Planning Commission adopts that master plan. There's very few required elements. Master plan is advisory, and the master development or master
Drainage basin planning study. So drainage basin planning study is a component of the master plan once it gets adopted. And this is just some examples of topical elements of the master plan, the transportation corridors plan, which was adopted in 2024, other corridor plans, parks master plan, and then at the bottom of this list, there's the drainage basin planning study master plans. The most recent ones that are in process and adopted are listed there. And Falcon was adopted in 2015, I believe. So this is few and far between on this process at this point. Yeah. So the Drainage Basin Master Plan establishes regional improvements and fees. And as part of the master plan, those direct development and help them guide with what their drainage plans are and help with construction and reimbursement of the needed facilities during construction and development. Here's kind of an overview map of the drainage basin. Again, the study is to understand existing conditions, anticipate the future potential issues and how those would be addressed, solutions, and a concept plan as far as where improvements would be needed and what those costs would be. And then the fees for the drainage basin would be set up based on those anticipated costs going forward. So let me skip to go to the Stantec presentation. Blair, are you available online?
Yes. Yeah,
Okay.
I'm on.
Okay, and I think I'll need to run the slides, right?
Yep, that'll be fine.
Okay.
Yeah, Jeff introduced the study, and we'll go to the next slide. I'll give a quick, more detailed overview of what that entailed. So to develop this plan and drainage fees, we first did a field investigation of overall drainage basin characteristics. We looked at the hydrology, or estimating what were the typical flows and peak flows in the area. We look at the hydraulics, which would be the extent of the flooding under current conditions and under future developed conditions. Then we looked at various alternatives to address, the impacts of development on these stream channels. Then we selected an alternative, further developed that selected alternative, and then worked with the county on developing the drainage fees. There's a website there. All this information is on the website. All the detailed studies and extensive background of this is on a county website at this point. This is the existing conditions map of land use, and you can see primarily, it's rapidly changing, of course, right? So, but as of date of this map, it was primarily, agriculture with some low density residential. Go to the next slide. And the topography, important part of this is that the lower parts of the watershed are not that steep, but the upper parts are fairly steep and sand bed streams, which can be very erodible. And with urbanization and increased flows into these streams, it can cause a lot of erosion problems. So next slide. So then we go to looking at future land use, right? So under the master plan, we were given these future land use, and primarily would be a lot more low density residential. A lot of the ag would be gone, and even some medium to high density parts of the watershed. This would create additional flows, in the stream channels. The hardscape of the drainage basin would create additional flows, even with the requirements of not increasing the peak flow. You still have an increase of flow volume that then has to be mitigated. We did include, during the study, things were being developed as this study went on. We included, if reaches were already developed, they were not included in the drainage basin calculation, though they were still part of the study. Drainage fee calculation, but they were still part of the study. All right, next slide. All right, and so this is just to give a quick overview of what what the stream looks like. This is lower down on the Jimmy Camp and in the most downstream portion of the watershed. Then we'll walk our way up the watershed. This is a fairly heavily, relatively forested part of the watershed, less steep, and would require less, fewer measures to stabilize. Then as we go upstream into some of the tributaries, next slide. And so this is East Fork, a tributary to Jimmy Camp. You can see, a lot more undeveloped. And the stream bed here, primarily sand bed stream, with relatively shallow banks. Next slide. Again, sand bed stream, shallow banks. This is Upper Franceville, another tributary that was studied. Next slide. And Corral tributary, again, similar characteristics. And so a lot of these upper streams are sand bed streams, relatively, shallow banks. And this is, under a fairly, I would say, natural, condition for these streams. Next slide. And this is Strip Mine, again, a little bit bigger stream, very similar. Next. So these are all the tributaries that we looked at. All these feed Jimmy Camp and are part of this study. Then we did the hydrology study looking at what are the flows under existing conditions, and then what are the flows under the proposed conditions and their future land use types. And this was done for the entire basin, though again, we're only focusing on areas with, in the county, but outside the city limits of Colorado Springs. But in order to do that, we need to understand the whole system, right? So the whole system was studied, but then the specific designs and drainage fees only done performed for the parcels, the areas in the county and outside the city limits. Next slide. Right, did you?
So this just notes the peak flows and the flow volumes.
Yeah,
on the
same
left.
slide, sorry. But yes, the peak flows, there's requirements under city guidelines to not increase the peak flow, the maximum flow that occurs. However, you still have a flow volume that's significantly higher under the proposed future conditions of development than it is now. A factor of 6 to 7, depending on where you are. And that's a lot more flow volume, you saw the streams, and with that much more flow volume you can get very extensive erosion that creates a lot of issues, if not mitigated. Next slide.
Sorry,
all right, so then
it's stuck. Is it working?
That's yeah.
Oh, it might have gone further than one. Let me see. Okay, now it's working.
Right. Okay. And okay. So we estimated how much, the peak flows and volumes of flows occurring in the stream channel. Then we need to estimate what does that mean to the flood extent? How far does the flood go out? How fast are the flows, right? And what would that mean for both the flood extent and the impacts to the channel? So we developed, this is what the HEC-RAS model is for, is for assessing both the floodplain and the flow velocities. All right, next slide. So we have these maps of estimated 100-year floodplains. They are not the same or not intended to be the same as the FEMA flood maps. The FEMA flood maps are based on a different hydrologic condition. These were developed for the purposes of the drainage basin plan in order to assess drainage fees. They weren't, this study was not done to develop the FEMA regulatory floodplain. We did compare against it, and in general, the FEMA flood map is much wider. They used a much more conservative estimate of the 100-year flood than what was used for the drainage basin plan. Next slide. We also evaluated the capacity of bridges and culverts to see if they currently pass the 100-year flood, and then what would need to be done in order to make them pass the 100-year flood. There were some culverts and crossings that were that did not pass a 100-year flood, and those have been identified as part of this study and included in the costs. And then we looked at assessed the likelihood that these stream channels would erode in general, because again, they're sandbed and steep, right? They're all very, they're very likely to erode under future developed conditions. Next slide. So then we looked at two alternatives for addressing this erosion problem. Well, three alternatives. We did need to compare against no action, meaning if we just, didn't do anything and let what happens into the streams. And so there are examples of that, and some right within near where we're looking at. Sand Creek, and I'm sure you're familiar with several of your streams will have erosion problems, and a lot of that is due to urbanization, increased flows, and causing erosion of these stream channels. And so we did compare against no action what that would mean, and then we had two alternatives for addressing it. One is simply doing conveyance improvements with no regional detention. That means we're going to stabilize the streams. The flows are going to come in, and we aren't going to modify how much flow comes into the stream channel, but we will stabilize the streams. The second alternative would be to create additional detention in order to further reduce these peak flows and meter out flow to reduce the amount of erosion that could occur in these streams. So the detention would try to minimize the flow rates and flow velocities so that we have minimal amounts of erosion, and it would reduce the amount of stabilization necessary. So we looked at these two alternatives. Next slide. And we evaluated them based upon these items. One is just the channel and floodplain goals, meaning are these what is the 100-year floodplain between the two alternatives? What would the impact be on roads? And then what would the impact be on the channels in terms of erosion and other problems created in the channels? And then how would these, what would the environmental effects of these be from a qualitative standpoint? And, how would this affect open space? How would it affect, other related uses of the stream channel? And then the cost, of course, is minimizing cost, and maintenance of this is a goal. So next slide. And then we had several assumptions within our alternative analysis. One being we're assuming that they're within each development they are limiting the peak flows to existing conditions. Peak flows, meaning the 100-year flood is not increased with development, even though the flow volumes are. Okay, and then the other would be, we're assuming that we could design to a stable channel slope with, proper grade control. We'd include existing improvements that are occurring or have occurred, and then that we would improve the road crossings as part of this. And that we had limits on how big these grade control structures would be, that we're generally limiting them to 4 feet or less. And in cases of there's two types of channels, so-called natural channels and natural constructed channels and constructed channels. We're limiting those drops or the size of the grade control structures so that they're maintainable and don't, they don't become, for example, dams, right? Under the regional detention options, we're assuming that those structures would be no bigger than a 10-foot dam, so they don't become jurisdictional dams. Next slide. So we did all the assessment, did assessment of costs, and determined that channel alternative one without regional detention was a cheaper option. The benefits of regional detention were fairly minor in terms of reducing the amount of grade control necessary, number one. Number two, the cost and maintenance of those regional detention structures is large, and the cost benefit of additional detention measures and the long-term maintenance required for those structures was just not enough to offset to provide enough benefit. All right. Oh, sorry, next slide. So then, then we developed a design for alternative one so that those stream channels could be maintained in a relatively stable form. There's based upon guidance from NRCS in terms of maximum velocity, and they were designed to withstand this increased flow volume. Next slide. This is the map of all the stream channels that were assessed. You can see the city boundaries, and outside the city boundaries is where that design was developed, in all those different tributaries. Jimmy Camp, Blaney, Barral, Strip Mine, West Fork, Upper Franceville, and East Fork all had designs in them. As we in the alternative mentioned that another problem with the detention option shown on this slide is that there's just limited spots for detention that would benefit the county, right? The county's in the upper part of the watershed. The detention then would need to be in the upper part of the watershed. There's limited number of sites to do that, and so that was another reason alternative 2 was did not pan out. Then we did. All right, so then we get to the channel design, and these are typical channel shown in terms of what would be designed, and there's 3 categories. One would be maintenance only. We don't we think nothing needs to be done in this reach, and we're recommending just maintenance, if future problems do arise. Then there would be the constructed channel, which would be in areas where the floodplain is not well constrained, and we need to had both a channel and a floodplain in order to constrain those flood flows and allow development in the area. Then there would be the constructed natural channel, which would be try to maintain a natural floodplain, but then stabilize this main channel or the low flow channel so that it doesn't erode. Generally, we were constructed natural channel is the primary one in most of the watershed, except in areas where that floodplain was too expansive, and we suggested the constructed channel. And so there's a map of those, of where these things are recommended. As mentioned, the yellow, primarily the yellow is the constructed natural channel. There's some lower parts down in the Jimmy Camp where it's a heavily forested floodplain. We don't want to disturb that nice floodplain you have in areas that's forested and well stabilized, and we're recommending maintenance only. As an example of what that would be, the next slide, a constructed channel, as expected, looks like a constructed channel, where we have both the main channel and the floodplain, contoured and stabilized. Versus the natural constructed channel, we do a less invasive sort of stabilization, and it'd be focused more on the main channel. The floodplain would be revegetated naturally and hopefully maintained in a natural form. Next slide. Again, we had these different treatments, right? But then there's different conditions that exist now. So like whether it's already improved or unimproved. There's some sections that are already improved, but most are unimproved within the county, right? So that's the primary type would be the unimproved, and that we anticipate future problems under development. That's a type 3. That's the most common. You see there in red. Yeah, red. Okay. Yep. Next slide. Then we developed costs for all the we developed costs by reach, right? So it's broken out by tributary, and then sub reaches within those tributaries, and we developed costs for both the channel improvements, the grade control. There's no detention costs because we aren't recommending that. Other costs related to like revegetation, and that would also include the improvements to culverts and bridges. So that was totaled and subtotaled for the tributaries, with engineering and some contingency included in those costs. And so that was done for all those tributaries. And then I don't know if, Jeff, you want to take over, how then these cost estimates are then converted into drainage fee?
Yeah, I'll touch briefly on that. So thank you, Blair. So we have scheduled a kind of a draft conversation or discussion with the Drainage Board to discuss our kind of fee options going forward, and that'll be the 28th, I believe, of this month. So this hearing for the Planning Commission was the first hearing, and the second hearing would be where we actually approve, or you guys actually approve the plan. So this was for discussion and public comment, any issues. We did have a lot of stakeholder involvement. I think that's addressed in the staff report. Well, we had a lot of opportunity for stakeholder involvement. We didn't have a huge amount of stakeholders that were involved. But as far as the fee goes, so this table that Blair had on the last slide, the 154 million. So from there, we take that forward and look at what's existing deficiencies that new development isn't responsible for, and we subtract those out. And then there's two other issues in this basin. The west tributary or west fork of the Jimmy Camp Creek was separated out as its own basin at one point. I think this was about 10 or 15 years ago, so it has its own fee, and there's not really hardly any improvements left in that basin. There's no bridges left in that basin, so we're looking at how do we account for, do we keep that as a separate basin or wrap it back into the overall basin? And then the other part is the Bull Hill Rolling Meadows project wants to close their part of the basin, which means they're going to cover all their costs. They don't have to deal with the paperwork as far as the fees and tracking those things. They're going to do channel improvements that outweigh what their costs would be in the study, in the fee system. So it's kind of separating that development from the fee system. And we've already closed Lorson Ranch. They only had a few, 4 more plats, I think, left, and their costs were outweighing the fees. So that was approved by the Drainage Board and Board of County Commissioners to close that fee on Lorson on those remaining plats, so they don't have to keep doing paperwork down there. So we have some options for Drainage Board to discuss. If anybody's interested in those, we can provide those, or you can listen in the Drainage Board. So this is just as far as the planning side of it, to see if everything's okay with the Planning Commission, and then on the next step would be approval. So.
I think you kind of answered a little bit of my question, but, development costs, how this will be paid for ultimately. Right. I've done some work with the Fountain Creek and hugely expensive projects that are hard to fund. So would this go to the general fund for the county?
No, it goes to a drainage fee fund. So there's a separate fund that's kind of managed by the Drainage Board, gives guidance, and the county commissioners. So it's a totally separate account in the treasurer's office that has those funds.
And they come from the developers, et cetera, right?
So they come from the developers, and then as developers do improvements, they can get
So the county would have no costs?
The county, there's existing deficiencies that are out there somewhere. So you'd have to assume at some point some public agency, district, or county will have to fix those. They're not allocated on a county budget or anything at this point in time, but this identifies those areas that have existing issues and deficiencies that would need to be corrected at some point in time. And sometimes, like in the Falcon Basin, there's developers that come in, and those existing deficiencies caused by upstream development already are going through their property, and then the Drainage Board and board sometimes will allow those to be reimbursable by increasing the fee on the remaining properties, so that the developer will build those instead of waiting until there's funding through some other source to construct those improvements. So there's different ways to get there. And I think the DPW is also looking at the capital improvements programs and how do we kind of prioritize and start looking at getting grants and funding to do some drainage improvements.
Is there any, are there now, or could there be in the future any penalties to the county, or I don't know who they would penalize, but for effluent going into Fountain Creek, over a certain standard?
As far as the sediment and from the erosion, I mean, it's not in our MS4 permit area, which is, I think, part of the main concern. I mean, there's always the... It
just seems like Pueblo's always finding us for stuff.
Yeah, so between the city and Pueblo, I think that had more to do with their MS4 permit issues and not strictly following the city's own regulations as far as development goes and addressing those issues. So I think we're trying to so when new development comes in at this point, like 30 or 40 years ago, they didn't have to do too much as far as drainage and that kind of grading and erosion control issues. when development comes in, currently, they do have to require, or follow all of our criteria for
Pretty much contain
erosion
it-
control,
contain it on their own,
detention, water quality, yeah.
Okay, thanks. Other questions? Yes, Mr. Trowbridge.
I was fascinated about the imperviousness chart that you had.
Oh, yeah.
And I was trying to look through the report. I was trying to find an average number, but the increase in impervious area in this basin is just astonishing. Yeah,
Right.
that one.
Yeah,
Do you have an overall increase number? Is it like, it looks like it's going to be 60 to 65% increase in imperviousness, is it not?
Yeah, it's a pretty large amount. I don't have that number with me right here, but it, like, for example.
Is it in the report and I just didn't find it yet?
Oh, no, that's not, I don't think that, like, that comparison is in here. I mean, it talks in general about the percentages and
Right.
going from basically 2 to 5% to 30% and over in a lot of areas. So that's a large increase. And another complication of that is the city has bought and annexed properties within this as we've been going also. So those areas, those will be more impervious as well as far as that urban development, but those will be, the city will be handling those issues through their drainage.
Right. No, I'm just trying to wrap my head around the imperviousness and how much that factors into the flows.
Right, and these are based on
such.
the master plan, so it's kind of assuming this is what could happen here. I mean, in reality, a lot of this property has a lot of constraints and topography, like Blair was mentioning, in the upper part of the basin, the steep slopes, and so when we do our fee calculations, we're kind of trying to balance that out because it's probably not going to develop to this extent ultimately. So we try to see what's realistic on some of those property, the larger properties where it's just huge properties, or like Corral Bluffs where it's like going to be open space potentially, or things where you can't do development. So when we do the fees, we try to take that into account and have a realistic fee going forward. That accounts for
Okay,
that.
thanks.
Yeah, so this kind of looks at the worst case for the runoff going through there.
Jeff, what's your time frame for these increases? Is it 50 years, 100 years?
As far as the
For
development?
these impervious maps that we're looking at now?
I don't know that there's really a time frame. It just depends on if development decides that this is the next area that's feasible to start putting subdivisions and things like that. It's, like I said, it's pretty constrained in some areas, so it's hard to find kind of large parcels or places where you could do large developments. So I think it's going to take a long time if it ever does get to this level.
Yeah, so it seems like, to me, it's an exaggeration to a degree. The other quick thought, how confident are you in the cost estimates?
These are, I think
'Cause
they're very good.
it feels a little
reason.
low.
Yeah, I mean.
Even with the 25% contingency, it still feels low.
Yeah, they were trying to focus on the naturalized channels instead of reconstructing channels with full drop structures and all that kind of thing. And of course, over time, the inflation goes up, and that's why we raise the fees every year or two to keep up with inflation. But I think these costs are reasonable. They're based on, Blair, I think you used Mile High Flood District's estimations, right, on some of those numbers?
Yeah, generally, the unit costs are consistent with the Mile High flood districts, unit costs, and,
Which
the
are
measures
probably
are
low
consistent
also.
with what they would recommend.
Yeah, they're always based on past experience. So, I mean, going forward, we're always a year behind. But
Yeah, I mean, we escalated, I think that, we escalated these to current, with the cost, we escalated to current levels.
Right.
But
And as far as development goes, if a development does go in, for example, on strip mine, and they see the cost of having to improve a channel due to increased runoff, that could encourage more low impact development type development where they try to infiltrate the water back into the ground instead of sending it downstream with the higher volumes that causes the need for all those improvements. So in this basin, I see going forward that there's going to probably be a trade-off with developers when they see how much improvements need to be done compared to what they're doing, that they might go to more low impact development type sites, so where they can infiltrate the water back into the ground.
Any other questions, comments? Great. It's a very in-depth report. Thank you.
Okay, so I think hopefully we might be back in February the end of February to get approval. And then we'll be proceeding with the Drainage Board and on the fee side of it, so.
Do you anticipate any changes to this between now and then?
No, we're just doing some cleanup and minor editing on the actual document itself on the PDF. But like Blair mentioned, it's all, like the draft is all on the website, but there's not going to be any significant changes that we can see at this point.
Great. Great, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Anyone else have anything to talk about?
Next meeting.
Yeah, when's our next meeting?
I think, yeah.
Just to let everyone know, the next meeting, February 6th, has been canceled.
Oh, okay.
Oh, really? Fantastic. All right. Very good. Well, we'll see you later in February. Our meeting's adjourned.